My son-in-law sold the house my daughter paid for and left her to freeze on the streets of Chicago while he moved his mistress into a luxury penthouse. He thought because I was just an old retired mechanic that I was powerless. He thought I was nothing but a ghost from her past. He was wrong. When I showed up at his building the next day, I did not bring a weapon. I brought a single piece of paper that would turn his millionaire life into a prison sentence. But before I tell you how I destroyed him, let me tell you about the moment that broke my heart and started this war. If you are listening to this, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you are hearing my story from. I want to know how far my voice can reach. It was Christmas Eve in Chicago, and the wind felt like a razor blade slicing against my skin. The thermometer read 10 degrees below zero, but with the wind chill, it felt like the Arctic. I wrapped my old security guard coat tighter around my chest, but the cold found every gap. I am 71 years old. I do not need to work. I have enough money buried away to buy the entire block I was walking on, but I take these night shifts at the warehouse because silence is better than an empty house. My name is Otis King. Most people see a tall, gray-haired black man with rough hands and a limp, and they assume I am just another old laborer trying to survive. They do not know about the infrastructure company I built from the ground up. They do not know I still own the controlling stake. I like it that way. Invisibility is a superpower if you know how to use it. I was walking the 4 blocks from the bus stop to my brownstone. The neighborhood was quiet. Blue and white Christmas lights blinked from the windows of the townhouses. I could smell wood smoke and roasting turkeys from the ventilation fans. It was the smell of families being together. It was a smell that used to make me smile, but tonight it just made the hollow ache in my chest feel heavy. I passed the bus shelter on Martin Luther King Drive. It is usually empty this late, but tonight there was a pile of garbage bags and cardboard boxes stacked in the corner against the glass. I almost kept walking. In this city, you learn to mind your business if you want to make it home safe. But then I saw the shivering. The pile of trash was moving. It was a rhythmic, violent shaking. I stopped. My boots crunched on the frozen black ice. I told myself to keep moving. I told myself it was probably just a junkie crashing from a high or a drunk who missed the last bus. But my feet would not move. I have always had this instinct. It is what made me a good engineer. I notice when a structural beam is off by a fraction of an inch. I notice when something is wrong. I stepped closer. The wind howled down the avenue, whipping up snow devils that danced around my legs. "Hey," I called out, my voice raspy from the cold. "You cannot sleep here. You will freeze to death." The pile did not answer. It just kept shaking. I sighed and reached into my pocket for a $20 bill. I figured I would give the poor soul money for a hot meal and keep moving. I stepped into the shelter. That is when I saw the hand. It was sticking out from under a dirty gray blanket. The skin was ashen, almost purple from the cold. The fingers were thin, too thin, like bird bones wrapped in paper. But it was not the condition of the hand that made my heart stop beating. It was the ring. On the pinky finger there was a cheap silver ring. It was tarnished and dented. It was worth maybe $5 at a pawn shop, but I knew that ring. I knew every scratch on it. I bought that ring at a street fair 20 years ago for my daughter Keisha when she was 10 years old. It had a tiny engraving on the inside that said "Daddy's Girl." She had cried when I gave it to her. She swore she would never take it off. "No," I whispered. The word came out like a puff of white smoke. It could not be her. Keisha lived in a 5-bedroom house on Oak Street. Keisha was married to Braden Sterling, the hot-shot real estate broker. Keisha was happy. Or at least that is what I told myself for the last 3 years while Braden kept me away. I dropped my lunch pail. It clattered loudly on the concrete, but I did not care. I fell to my knees on the dirty ice. I reached out and grabbed the edge of the filthy blanket. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the fabric. I pulled it back. The face staring back at me was a skull. Her cheeks were sunken in. Her lips were cracked and blue. Her beautiful dark skin was gray and patchy with frostbite. Her hair, that thick, curly hair she used to be so proud of, was matted with dirt and grease. She smelled like sickness and old rain. "Keisha," I choked out. "Baby girl." Her eyes fluttered open. They were glassy and unfocused. She looked at me, but she did not see me. She did not see her father. She did not see the man who taught her how to ride a bike and how to change a tire. She saw a uniform. She saw my security guard jacket. She flinched. It was a violent, full-body jerk of terror. She tried to scramble backward, pressing her spine against the freezing glass of the bus shelter. She raised her hands to cover her face. "Please," she whimpered. Her voice was like grinding glass. "Please, officer, do not hit me. I am moving. I am going. Just give me a second. I promise I will go." The sound of her voice broke something inside me that I did not know was breakable. She thought I was going to beat her. She thought I was going to kick her out into the snow. "Keisha, look at me. It is Daddy. It is Otis." She blinked rapidly. She was burning up with fever. I could feel the heat radiating off her even in the freezing air. She lowered her hands slowly. She squinted at me. "Daddy," she whispered. "Yes, baby. I am here." "Daddy, he said you were dead." The words hit me harder than the winter wind. Who said I was dead? Braden. She coughed, and a thin line of blood trickled from the corner of her cracked lips. "Braden said you died of a heart attack. He said nobody wanted me anymore. He said I had to leave the house." I felt a coldness spread through my veins that had nothing to do with the weather. It was a cold, sharp rage, a quiet, deadly fury. Braden Sterling, the man who refused to let me come to the house because my grease-stained hands would embarrass his clients. The man who smiled with too many teeth. He had told my daughter I was dead to isolate her. He had thrown her out like garbage. "How long?" I asked. "How long have you been out here?" She closed her eyes. "I do not know. Maybe a week, maybe a month." He changed the locks. "He sold the house, Daddy. He sold our home." She started to cry, but she was too dehydrated for tears. Her body just heaved with dry sobs. I took off my heavy coat. I wrapped it around her frail body. She felt like nothing in my arms. She used to be strong. She used to play varsity volleyball. Now she felt like a bundle of dry sticks. I scooped her up. I stood up on my bad knee, and I did not even feel the pain. I felt nothing but the weight of my daughter and the weight of my failure. I had let this happen. I had respected her husband's wishes to stay away. I had thought I was giving them space. I was giving a wolf space to eat my lamb. "I am taking you home, baby," I said into her matted hair. "Home," she mumbled. "I do not have a home." "Braden said the bank took it." "You have a home," I said. "You have my home. And Braden is going to pay for every second you spent in this cold." She passed out in my arms, her head lolling against my chest. I began to walk. I did not wait for a taxi. I needed to move. I needed to burn off the energy before I did something that would put me in jail tonight. I walked the remaining blocks to my brownstone carrying my grown daughter like she was a baby. People passed us. They looked at the old black man carrying the homeless woman, and they looked away. They did not want to get involved. That was fine. I did not need them. I needed a doctor, and then I needed a lawyer. But first I needed to get her warm. When I got inside my house, I laid her on the sofa. I turned the heat up until the furnace rattled. I went to the kitchen and got warm water and a cloth. I started to clean her face. As I wiped away the grime, I saw the bruises. They were old yellow and green marks on her jaw, fingerprint-shaped bruises on her upper arms. He had put his hands on her. I stopped wiping. I stared at the bruises. My hands, which have built bridges and tunnels, hands that can crush a walnut, clenched into fists so tight my knuckles turned gray. Braden Sterling was a dead man walking. He just did not know it yet. I picked up my phone. I dialed a number I had not called in 5 years. "Dr. Evans," I said when he answered. "This is Otis King." "Otis, it is Christmas Eve. I know, I need you at my house, now. I have $100,000 in cash in my safe. It is yours if you get here in 20 minutes and bring a full IV kit and antibiotics. And bring a camera. A camera. Why? Because I need to document every bruise. I need to document every rib that sticks out. I am going to bury him, doctor. I am going to bury him under a mountain of evidence." I hung up the phone. I looked at Keisha. She was shivering again, even under the blankets. He said I was dead. I whispered to the empty room. "Tomorrow I am going to rise from the grave. And I am going to pay Braden a visit." I sat there holding her hand, rubbing her freezing fingers, trying to put life back into them. I looked at the Daddy's Girl ring. I remembered the day I gave it to her. She had hugged me and said, "Daddy, you are my hero." I had failed that title. I had let a monster destroy her while I sat in the shadows trying to be respectful. Never again. The sun would be up in 6 hours. When that sun rose, Otis the mechanic was going to disappear. And Otis King, the man who owns the concrete beneath Braden's feet, was going to come out to play. I kissed her forehead. "Sleep, baby," I said softly. "When you wake up, you will own the city. And the man who did this to you will wish he had frozen to death out there, instead of you." I sat back and waited for the doctor. The rage in my chest was a cold blue flame. It was steady, it was efficient, and it was going to burn Braden Sterling to the ground. The sterile lights of the private clinic hummed with a sound that drilled straight into my skull. Dr. Evans had insisted we move her here. He said my brownstone was warm, but she needed equipment I did not have. She needed monitors. She needed oxygen. She needed to be in a place where death wasn't waiting in the corners. I stood in the corner of the room watching the heart monitor trace a green line that was too weak and too fast. My hands were in my pockets, clenching my keys so hard the metal bit into my palm. I needed the pain. The pain kept me from punching the wall. Evans walked over to me. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had seen too much evil for one night. "Otis, she is severely malnourished," he said, his voice low. "We are pumping her with fluids and antibiotics, but her immune system is shattered. She has pneumonia in both lungs. If you had found her tomorrow instead of tonight, we would be having a very different conversation." I nodded. My throat felt like it was full of gravel. "Is that all?" Evans hesitated. He looked back at Keisha, sleeping a fitful drug-induced sleep. "No, Otis, that is not all. We found healed fractures in her ribs, 2 of them, and her left ulna, the bone in her forearm, showed a hairline fracture that healed poorly. It looks like a defensive wound, like she raised her arm to block a heavy object." I stopped breathing for a moment. Defensive wound. My daughter was not clumsy. She was graceful. She was a dancer in high school. These were not accidents. These were messages written on her bones by her husband. I looked at her face. Even in sleep, she looked pained. Her brow was furrowed like she was waiting for the next blow. I closed my eyes and the memory hit me. It was 3 years ago. I was standing on the porch of the house on Oak Street. It was a beautiful house, 5 bedrooms, brick facade, a sprawling lawn. It was the kind of house a man dreams of giving his family, and I had given it to them. I remembered Braden standing in the doorway blocking my path. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my truck. He looked at my grease-stained work boots. He looked at the oil under my fingernails that no amount of scrubbing could ever fully remove. "You can't come in today," Otis Braden had said. He didn't call me Dad. He never called me Mr. King, just Otis. Like I was his employee. Why not, I had asked. It was Keisha's birthday. I had a gift in my pocket, a vintage watch that had belonged to my mother. "We have clients coming over," Braden sneered. "High-end clients. Investors. They want to know they are dealing with success. No offense, Otis, but you look like the help. You smell like diesel and cheap coffee. It ruins the aesthetic." I should have knocked his teeth out right then and there. My fist had twitched, but then I saw Keisha in the hallway behind him. She looked happy. She looked proud of her husband, the big-shot real estate developer. She didn't hear him insult me. So I swallowed my pride. I swallowed it like a stone. "Fine," I had said. "Give her this for me." I handed him the watch. He took it with 2 fingers like it was contaminated. I walked away. I walked away from the house that I paid for. That was the secret I kept. That was the silence I maintained. Braden told everyone he was a self-made millionaire. He told everyone his real estate genius bought that mansion. Lies. I paid the down payment, 60% of the total value, $400,000 wired from a shell company so Braden wouldn't know it was me. I wanted him to feel like a man. I wanted him to provide. I thought if I gave him the foundation, he would build the rest. I was the silent partner in his life, just like I was the silent partner in the city's construction. I paid for the roof over his head so he could look down on me from the balcony. And now I found out he was breaking my daughter's ribs inside the walls I bought. A sound from the bed snapped me back to the present. Keisha was waking up. It wasn't a peaceful waking. She gasped, her body jerking upright against the restraints of the sheets. Her eyes flew open wide and terrified. She scanned the room frantically. The heart monitor began to beep faster, a staccato rhythm of panic. "No," she screamed. Her voice was raspy and weak. "I didn't sign it. I didn't mean to. Please don't put me back outside. It's too cold. I rushed to the bedside. I tried to take her hand, but she flinched away from me. She pulled her knees up to her chest, trying to make herself small, trying to disappear. Keisha, baby, look at me. It's me. It's Daddy. She froze. She turned her head slowly. Her eyes tried to focus on my face. She blinked once, twice. Daddy, she whispered. I am here, baby. You are safe. You are in a clinic. Dr. Evans is taking care of you. She reached out and touched my face. Her fingers were cold. She traced the scar on my chin. She touched the gray stubble on my cheek. She needed to feel that I was real. You came back, she sobbed. You came back from heaven. I frowned. What are you talking about, baby? I didn't go anywhere. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face, washing away the grime I hadn't managed to clean off. He told me you died. He showed me the paper. I felt a darkness rise up in me that was deeper than any hole I had ever dug. Tell me everything, Keisha, I said. My voice was calm, but it was the calm of a hurricane eye. Tell me everything Braden did. She took a shaky breath. The nurse came in to check the monitors, but I waved her away. I needed to hear this. It started 6 months ago, she said. Braden came home and said the market had crashed. He said he lost everything. Bad investments. He said we were going to lose the house. He said the bank was coming for us. He was crying, Daddy. He cried in my lap. I stroked her hair. He is an actor, baby, a snake in a suit. He brought me papers, she continued, stacks of them. He said it was for debt restructuring. He said it was to protect my credit score. He said if I signed them, we could save the assets. He said we had to transfer the deed to a holding company to keep the bank from seizing it. I closed my eyes. I knew exactly what she had signed. She had signed a quitclaim deed. She had signed away her rights to the property. She had probably signed a post-nuptial agreement waiving spousal support. I trusted him, Daddy. He was my husband. I signed everything. I didn't even read it. Of course you didn't, because you have a good heart, and he used that heart against you. 2 days later, she whispered. 2 days after I signed, he came home with her, Tiffany. The name hung in the air like a foul odor. Who is Tiffany? I asked. She is 22. She is an influencer. She models swimwear on Instagram. Keisha looked down at her hands. Her hands were rough and chapped from the cold. Tiffany has soft hands, Daddy. Braden brought her into our living room. He told me to pack a bag. He kicked you out for a mistress. He didn't just kick me out. He laughed at me. He told me the house was sold. He told me the holding company I signed the deed over to was actually a shell company owned by Tiffany. He sold our home to his mistress for $1. I felt my teeth grind together. This was not just greed. This was cruelty. This was a man who enjoyed inflicting pain. I refused to leave, Keisha said. I screamed. I told him I was going to call you. I told him my father would fix this. She looked up at me, and her eyes were full of a pain that no doctor could fix. That is when he laughed. He went to his briefcase and pulled out a newspaper clipping. It was an obituary. It had your name on it, Daddy. It had your picture. He said you died of a heart attack 2 weeks ago. He said he didn't tell me because he didn't want to upset me while we were dealing with the financial crisis. I sat there stunned. The level of planning, the level of malice. He had forged an obituary. He had probably printed it himself on newsprint to make it look real. He knew that if Keisha thought I was alive, she would fight. He knew I was the only person in the world who could stop him. So he killed me. In her mind, he killed me. I fell to the floor, Daddy. I fainted. When I woke up, my bags were on the sidewalk. The locks were changed. I pounded on the door. Tiffany looked out the window and laughed. She was wearing my robe. She started to shake again. The monitor beeped faster. I tried to go to the police, she said, but I had no proof. I signed the papers. Legally, I gave him everything. And I thought you were dead. I had no money. I had no phone. He canceled my service. I had nowhere to go. I slept in the park. Then it started to snow. I thought I was going to die, Daddy. I just wanted to go to sleep and see you again. I pulled her into my arms. I held her so tight I was afraid I might break her brittle bones, but she needed to feel the anchor. She needed to know I was solid. You are not going to die, I whispered into her ear. And you are not homeless. But the house, she sobbed, it is gone. Let him have the house, I said. She pulled back, looking at me confused. But Daddy, it is worth millions. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the Chicago skyline. The sun was starting to crest over the lake, a cold gray dawn for a cold gray city. I am not talking about the bricks and the mortar, Keisha. I am talking about the mistake he made. What mistake, she asked. He thinks he sold the house, I said, turning back to her. My face was hard. My eyes were dry. But a house is just a box, Keisha. It sits on land. And Braden Sterling forgot to check who owns the dirt. I reached into my inner pocket and pulled out a folded piece of yellowed paper. It was a copy of the original land trust agreement from 20 years ago. When I bought that land for you, I put the soil in a trust, an irrevocable trust in your name. He sold the building, but he does not own the ground it stands on, which means his mistress is currently trespassing on your property. Keisha stared at me. Her mouth opened slightly. And there is something else, I said. What? He said I was dead. He wanted me to be a ghost. I walked over to the chair where I had thrown my security guard jacket. Underneath it was a garment bag I had brought from home. I unzipped it. Inside was a charcoal gray bespoke suit, a silk tie, and a pair of polished Italian leather shoes. Today, I am going to grant his wish. Otis the mechanic is dead. I put on the jacket. It fit perfectly. It covered the workman's shoulders and gave me the silhouette of a king. Otis King, the chairman, is going to pay him a visit. I looked at my daughter. Rest now. Eat the food the doctor gives you. Get strong, because when you get out of this bed, you are going to watch his world burn. I turned to the door. Where are you going? She asked. I am going to introduce myself to Tiffany, and I am going to remind Braden that when you bury a man, you better make sure he is actually dead. I walked out of the clinic and into the freezing morning. The wind didn't bother me anymore. I was the storm now. I stood in front of the revolving glass doors of the Sterling Heights. It was a monolith of steel and arrogance piercing the Chicago sky. This was where Braden lived now. This was the fortress he built on lies. I had my bespoke suit in the garment bag in my truck, but I wasn't wearing it. Not yet. Today I was wearing my faded blue work coveralls with the patch on the chest that said Otis. My boots were scuffed. My hands were rough. I needed him to see the mechanic. I needed him to see the man he thought was beneath him. I pushed through the doors. The lobby smelled of expensive lilies and polished marble. A doorman stood behind a podium that cost more than my first car. He was young white and looked at me like I was a stain on his pristine floor. Can I help you? He asked without looking up from his tablet. Deliveries are in the back. I am not a delivery man, I said, my voice low and gravelly. I am here to see Braden Sterling, Penthouse 1. The doorman looked up then. He scanned me from my graying hair to my work boots. A sneer curled his lip. Mr. Sterling doesn't see walk-ins, especially not, he paused, letting his eyes drift over my coveralls again. Not your type. Do you have an appointment? Tell him his father-in-law is here. The doorman laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of a laugh. Mr. Sterling's father-in-law is dead. I read the memo. Now please leave before I call security. He reached for the phone, but the elevator doors chimed behind him. They slid open with a soft hush. Braden stepped out. He looked like $1 million. Tailored navy suit, Italian shoes, a gold watch that glinted under the chandelier lights. On his arm was a woman, Tiffany. She was wrapped in a white fur coat that looked like a cloud. She was young, beautiful, and had eyes that were as cold as the winter outside. Braden was laughing at something she said, but the laugh died in his throat when he saw me. He stopped. He didn't look scared. He didn't look guilty. He looked annoyed, like he had stepped in gum. Well, 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 he said, his voice echoing in the marble lobby. Look who crawled out of the grave. Otis, I said. I took a step forward. My hands were loose at my sides, but every muscle in my body was coiled tight. Otis King Braden said, shaking his head. I thought you were dead, old man. That is what the obituary said. You wrote the obituary, Braden, I said. He shrugged, a small smirk playing on his lips. Details. It made the paperwork easier. Keisha was so distraught she would have signed anything. It was a kindness, really. A kindness I repeated. My voice was flat, but inside I was screaming. Leaving her to freeze on the street was a kindness. Tiffany giggled. She leaned into Braden, whispering loud enough for me to hear. Is this him? Is this the mechanic? He looks like a homeless person. Does he always smell like oil? Braden laughed and squeezed her waist. That is the smell of failure, babe. Otis here spent 40 years fixing other people's cars while I was building an empire. I ignored her. I kept my eyes locked on Braden. Where is my daughter? Braden checked his watch. It was a dismissive gesture designed to make me feel small. I don't know, Otis. Last I saw her, she was dragging a trash bag down the street. Maybe she found a nice bridge to sleep under, or maybe she is digging through dumpsters in the South Side. Who knows? She always was resilient, like a cockroach. My vision went red at the edges. I wanted to reach out and snap his neck. It would be easy. He was soft. He was doughy under that expensive suit. I was iron and concrete. But I remembered the plan. I remembered the long game. You sold the house, I said. The house on Oak Street. Braden's smile widened. He looked proud. Sold it in cash, he bragged. 1.2 million. The market was hot, Otis. You wouldn't understand. You deal in wrenches. I deal in assets. That was Keisha's house, I said. I paid for it. You gifted it, Braden corrected. And then she gifted it to me. Legal and binding. And then I turned that dusty old money pit into something useful. He pointed through the glass doors to the valet stand. A sleek black Porsche 911 was idling at the curb. See that beauty? That is the house on Oak Street. 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. Much better investment than a wife who couldn't even keep me entertained. Tiffany laughed again, a high, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. Oh, Braden, you are terrible. I looked at the car. Then I looked back at him. You think you are untouchable, don't you? I am untouchable, Otis. Braden sneered, stepping closer to me. He loomed over me, trying to use his height to intimidate, but I didn't flinch, didn't. I stood my ground like a pylon in a storm. I am the future councilman of this district, he hissed. I have friends in the mayor's office. I have the police chief on speed dial. You are a nobody, a ghost. Go back to your hole, Otis. Go find your daughter and share a cardboard box. Because if I see your face here again, I won't just call security. I'll have you arrested for harassment. He turned his back on me. He took Tiffany's arm and they walked toward the revolving doors. Hey, Braden, I called out. He stopped but didn't turn around. Make sure you enjoy the car, I said. It cost you everything. He glanced back over his shoulder, his eyes filled with contempt. Get lost, old man, before I lose my patience. They walked out into the cold morning air. I watched them get into the Porsche. I watched Braden tip the valet with $100 bill. I watched them drive away, the engine roaring like a beast. The doorman cleared his throat. You heard, Mr. Sterling, he said smugly. Time to go. I looked at the doorman. I looked at the marble floors. I looked at the gold plating on the elevator doors. I walked to the door. I pushed it open and stepped out into the wind. I didn't hit him. I didn't scream. I got exactly what I needed. He admitted it. He admitted he sold the house. He admitted he wrote the obituary. He admitted he knew Keisha was on the street. And he did it all in front of a witness. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. It had been recording the whole time. I walked to my truck. It was a beat-up Ford F-150 rusted at the wheel wells. Braden had laughed at it once. He called it a junker. He didn't know that under the hood was a custom engine I built myself. He didn't know it could outrun his Porsche if I wanted it to. Just like he didn't know who I really was. I sat in the truck and watched the building. He thinks the house is money, I whispered to the empty cab. He thinks the money is his. I put the truck in gear. I drove to the law offices of Goldberg and Associates. Saul Goldberg was the best shark in the city. He didn't care about justice. He cared about winning, and I was about to pay him a retainer that would make his eyes water. Braden had made his move. He had played his hand. Now it was my turn. And I wasn't going to play fair. I was going to play for keeps. The $1.2 million wasn't a profit. It was a noose. And Braden had just put his head right through it. Saul Goldberg did not have a corner office with a view of the lake. He operated out of a brownstone in the old district where the air smelled of stale coffee and cigar smoke. The walls were lined with case files that reached the ceiling, a library of other people's miseries. Saul was a small man with eyes like a hawk and a mind like a razor blade. I had paid him a retainer that would have bought a luxury sedan, and in exchange he gave me the truth. And the truth tasted like ash in my mouth. He threw the folder onto his mahogany desk. The paper slid across the polished wood and stopped right in front of my hands that were clenched so tight the knuckles were white. It is bulletproof, Otis, Saul said. He didn't sugarcoat it. That is why I hired him. I looked at the documents. They were copies of what Keisha had signed. What do you mean, bulletproof? I asked. My voice was low, a rumble in my chest. He defrauded her, Saul. He told her it was debt restructuring. He told her it was to save the house from the bank. Saul took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. I know what he told her. You know what he told her. But the law only cares about what is on the paper. And what is on the paper is a quitclaim deed. She voluntarily transferred her interest in the property to a holding company. A company that, as it turns out, lists Braden Sterling as the sole managing member. And here, he pointed a manicured finger at another document. This is a post-nuptial agreement. She waived her right to spousal support in exchange for him assuming the marital debt that he fabricated Otis. But she signed it. It is notarized. It is filed. In the eyes of the court, she gave him everything of her own free will. I stood up and paced the small office. The floorboards creaked under my boots. I felt like a caged animal. It was coercion. I growled. She was under duress. Proving that is going to take years, Saul said. And while we are fighting in court, Braden will liquidate the assets. He will hide the money in offshore accounts. By the time we get a judgment, if we get a judgment, there will be nothing left but a paper victory. I turned to the window. Outside, the city of Chicago was waking up. People were rushing to work, unaware that monsters walked among them in Italian suits. What about the police? I asked. I have photos of her injuries. I have the medical report from Dr. Evans. Saul sighed. I talked to the district attorney this morning. They are calling it a domestic dispute with no witnesses. It is, he said, she said. Braden has a clean record. He is a pillar of the community. He is running for city council, for God's sake. Unless Keisha recants her signature and we can prove he physically forced the pen into her hand, they are not going to touch a candidate 3 months before an election. They called it a civil matter. A civil matter. My daughter was freezing to death on a piece of cardboard, coughing up blood while her husband drank scotch in a penthouse, and the law called it a civil matter. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a sharp, angry vibration. I pulled it out. It was a text message from an unknown number, but I knew who it was. I opened the image attached. It was a photo of a document, a temporary restraining order. Below the image was a text. Stay away from me and my fiancé, old man. Next time you show up at my building, the police will not just ask you to leave. They will put you in a cell. I am suing you for harassment and emotional distress. You have 24 hours to stop contacting me, or I will file for damages against your little retirement pension. Do not play games with the big boys. I stared at the screen. The audacity was breathtaking. He stole my daughter's life, and now he was using the law as a shield to keep me from taking it back. He was mocking me. He thought I was helpless. He thought I was just a retired mechanic living on Social Security. He had no idea who he was dealing with. I put the phone back in my pocket. I looked at Saul. He thinks he has won, I said. Legally speaking, Saul said, leaning back in his chair. He has. He has the law on his side, Otis. He has the paperwork. He has the narrative. To the world, he is the successful businessman dealing with a crazy ex-wife and her aggressive father. I walked over to the wall of the office where a large map of Chicago hung. It was an old map, yellowed with age. It showed the streets and the neighborhoods, but when I looked at it, I didn't see the streets. I saw what was underneath. Braden Sterling saw Chicago as a collection of real estate opportunities. He saw facades, he saw penthouses, he saw curb appeal, but I saw the skeleton. 40 years ago, I wasn't just a mechanic. Before I bought the infrastructure company, I was the chief city engineer for the Deep Tunnel project. I spent 2 decades underground. I designed the drainage systems that keep this city from drowning. I mapped the foundation of every major skyscraper built in the last 30 years. I know where the bedrock is soft. I know where the old gas lines run that aren't on the public blueprints. I know which luxury towers are built on solid ground and which ones are just floating on mud and a prayer. I know the secrets buried under the concrete. Braden thought power was a signature on a deed. He thought power was a suit and a title. He didn't know that real power is knowing where the structural weaknesses are. Real power is knowing that if you pull one specific brick, the whole wall comes down. I turned back to Saul. My face was calm. The rage had settled into a cold, hard resolve. You are right, Saul, I said. The law cannot help me. The courts are too slow and he is too slippery. So what are you going to do? Saul asked, watching me carefully. Are you going to walk away? I picked up the file from his desk. I closed it. No, I said. I am done playing by his rules. He wants to use the law. Let him. I am going to use something else. What is that? I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Greed, I said, and vanity. Braden wants to be a councilman. He wants to be a big-shot developer. He is bidding on the harbor revitalization project, isn't he? Saul nodded slowly. Yes. It is a $50 million contract. If he lands that, he is set for life. It is the centerpiece of his campaign. I know, I said. I know because my company Kingston Infrastructure is the one vetting the bids. Saul's eyes widened. He knew about my company, but he didn't know the extent of my reach. Braden thinks I am a mechanic, I continued. He thinks I am a bug he can squash. He doesn't know that I am the one holding the magnifying glass. I walked to the door. I am not going to sue him, Saul. I am not going to beat him up. I am going to give him exactly what he wants. I am going to feed his ambition until he chokes on it. I opened the door and looked back at the lawyer. Keep the retainer. I might need you to bail me out later, but for now, the law is useless. I walked out of the office and into the gray light of the city. I looked at the skyscrapers looming over me. Braden was up there somewhere looking down, thinking he was a god. He forgot the first rule of construction. The higher you build, the deeper the foundation needs to be. And Braden Sterling was building his castle on quicksand. I took out my phone again. I didn't reply to Braden's text. Instead, I dialed a number that only 5 people in the world had. Marcus, I said when the voice answered. It is Otis. Mr. King. Marcus sounded surprised. I haven't heard from you in months. Is everything all right? No, I said. I am coming out of retirement. Sir, I need a job, Marcus. I need to be on the site assessment team for the harbor project. Consider it done, Marcus said without hesitation. He was a good man. I had paid for his engineering degree when he was just a kid from the projects. He would jump off a bridge if I asked him to. Do you want to lead the team? No, I said, watching a city bus roll by. I don't want to be the boss. Then what do you want? I want to be the janitor. There was a silence on the line. The janitor. Yes, I said. Put me on the payroll as OK Washington. Give me a mop and a bucket. And make sure I am assigned to the conference room where Braden Sterling is giving his presentation next week. I could hear the smile in Marcus's voice. He knew me too well. He knew I was hunting, understood Mr. King. I hung up. I looked at the restraining order on my phone one last time. You want me to stay away, Braden? I whispered. I won't come to your door. I will be right inside the room with you. I will be the invisible man cleaning up your mess. And while you are looking at the stars, I will be cutting the ground out from under your feet. You wanted a war. You got one. I went down to the basement of my brownstone. The air down here was different. It smelled of damp concrete and old iron. It smelled like the tunnels I used to build. Most people keep their skeletons in the closet. I kept my power in the basement. In the corner behind a stack of old tires and a broken lawnmower sat a safe. It was not one of those digital titanium boxes you see in the movies. It was a heavy cast iron behemoth from the 1920s. It weighed 800 pounds. I bought it from a bank that was being demolished 40 years ago. It was ugly. It was rusted in spots. It looked like junk, just like me. I knelt down on the cold concrete. My knees popped. A reminder of the years I spent laying pipe under the city streets. I spun the dial, left to 24, right to 11, left to 68. The numbers were not random. They were the dates of the first contract I ever won. The contract that took me from a laborer to a boss. The tumblers clicked, a heavy, satisfying sound. I pulled the handle and the door groaned open. There was no cash inside, no gold bars, no diamonds. Braden Sterling would have opened this safe and thought it was empty. He would have laughed. He would have seen a stack of boring manila folders and walked away. But Braden Sterling was an idiot. I pulled out the top folder. It was dusty. I wiped it off with my sleeve. Inside were the original stock certificates for Kingston Infrastructure, 51%, controlling interest. 20 years ago, I stepped down as CEO. I was tired of the suits. I was tired of the board meetings and the fake smiles. I wanted to get back to working with my hands. So I sold a chunk of the company to the public, and I put a young engineer named Marcus in the big chair. I retreated to the shadows. I became the silent partner. the ghost in the machine. To the world, Kingston Infrastructure was a massive, faceless corporation that built highways and bridges. To the board of directors, I was a name on a piece of paper that showed up once a year to vote by proxy. To Braden Sterling, I was a retired mechanic who couldn't afford a new suit. I opened the file. I ran my finger over the embossed seal. This paper was worth more than Braden's entire life. It was the nuclear option. I stood up and walked over to the workbench. I cleared away a pile of oily rags and laid the folder down. Next to it, I placed the campaign flyer I had ripped off a telephone pole that morning. Braden's face smiled up at me. It was a perfect smile. White teeth, tanned skin. The slogan read, "Building a future we can trust." He was running for city council. He was polling well. He had the look. He had the charisma. And he had the centerpiece of his campaign, the Harbor Revitalization Project. It was a $50 million contract to rebuild the old Navy Pier. It was the biggest infrastructure project in Chicago in a decade. And Braden's development firm, Sterling Properties, was the frontrunner to win the bid. He had leveraged everything he owned to get into position. He needed this contract. Without it, his campaign would collapse. His debts would swallow him whole. I looked at his smiling face. He looked so confident. He looked like a man who had never lost. He didn't know that Kingston Infrastructure was the primary consultant for the city. He didn't know that my company had the final veto power on which developer got the harbor contract. I could have called Marcus right then and told him to kill the bid. I could have ended it with one phone call. But that would have been too fast. That would have been mercy. Braden didn't deserve mercy. He deserved to be dismantled, piece by piece, bolt by bolt. I picked up the phone. I dialed Marcus's private line. He answered on the first ring. "Mr. King, what can I do for you?" "I am looking at the harbor project file, Marcus," I said. "Yes, sir. The bids are in. Sterling Properties is the lead candidate. They have the political backing. The mayor likes him." "I know," I said. "Keep him as the lead." There was a pause. Marcus was smart. He knew I hated Braden. He knew what Braden had done to Keisha. "Sir, you want us to approve his bid?" "No," I said. "I want you to string him along. I want you to make him think he has won. I want him to taste it. And then I want to be the one who takes it away." "Understood," Marcus said. "How do you want to proceed?" "I need to be on the ground, Marcus. I need access to the site assessment team, the group that goes to his office to vet his financials and check his compliance." "Done. I will appoint you as a senior advisor. You can walk in there and demand his books." "No," I said. Marcus paused again. "No. If I walk in there as a senior advisor, he will put his guard up. He will put on his mask. He will show me what he wants me to see. Then what do you want? I want to be invisible, Marcus. I want to be the person nobody looks at. I want to be the furniture." I looked down at my work boots. "Put me on the maintenance crew. I want to be the janitor for the assessment team." "The janitor," Marcus repeated. His voice was flat. He was trying to process it. "You own the company, sir. You want to mop floors." "I want to hear what he says when he thinks nobody is listening," I said. "Rich men like Braden Sterling don't see janitors, Marcus. To them, we are just part of the architecture. We are ghosts. He will talk on his phone right in front of me. He will leave documents on his desk while I am emptying his trash. He will reveal his throat because he doesn't think the man holding the broom has teeth." I could hear Marcus smiling through the phone. "Okay, Washington," Marcus said. "That will be the name on the badge. Otis King Washington." "It has a nice ring to it," I said. "I will have the uniform and the badge sent to your brownstone tonight. The assessment team starts at the Sterling offices on Monday morning. You will report to the site manager. His name is Frank. He is a good kid. I will tell him you are a special consultant doing a field audit, but that he is to treat you like a regular employee in front of everyone else." "Good," I said. "And Mr. King?" "Yes, Marcus. Do not kill him. We need him alive to sign the bankruptcy papers." I hung up the phone. I looked at the campaign flyer again. "Building a future we can trust." I took a marker from the workbench. I drew a thick black line across Braden's perfect white teeth. Monday morning. I was going to walk into his glass tower. I was going to wear a gray jumpsuit with a name tag that said OK. I was going to push a mop bucket across his marble floors. He would look right through me. He would probably even scold me if I missed a spot. He would treat me like dirt. And while he was busy polishing his ego, I was going to be planting the dynamite in the foundation of his life. I closed the safe. I spun the dial. The heavy click echoed in the silent basement. I walked back upstairs to the kitchen. Keisha was sitting at the table. She looked better. The color was coming back to her cheeks, but her eyes were still haunted. She jumped when I walked in. "Daddy," she said, "you were down there a long time." "Is everything okay?" "Everything is fine, baby," I said. I poured myself a cup of coffee. My hands were steady. "What are you going to do, Daddy?" she asked. She saw the look on my face. It was the same look I had when I fixed a transmission that everyone else said was broken beyond repair. It was the look of a man who had a plan. "I am going back to work, Keisha," I said. "Work, but you are retired." "Not anymore. I have one last job to do." She looked at me confused. "What kind of job?" "Clean up," I said. "I am going to clean up a big mess." I drank my coffee. It was black and bitter, just the way I liked it. Braden thought he was playing chess. He thought he was moving pieces on a board. He didn't know that I was the one who built the table. He wanted to be a big shot. He wanted to be a king. Well, he was about to meet the Emperor, and the Emperor was bringing a mop. The gray jumpsuit scratched against my skin, a constant reminder of the role I was playing. It smelled faintly of industrial lemon cleaner and stale sweat, an odor that acted like a force field repelling anyone who might look too closely. I pulled the brim of the navy blue cap lower over my eyes. I did not need eye contact. I did not need recognition. In this building of glass and steel, where ambition was the currency and ruthlessness was the trade, I had become the most powerful thing a man could be. I was invisible. I pushed the yellow mop bucket forward, the squeaking of the wheels the only sound announcing my arrival. The double doors to the executive conference room were slightly ajar. Through the gap I could see them, the board of directors, the investors, the sharks in Italian suits, and standing at the head of the long mahogany table was Braden. He looked exactly as the magazines portrayed him, charismatic, energetic, a man who owned the room before he even opened his mouth. He was wearing a suit that cost more than what I used to make in 3 months. He was gesturing at a large screen displaying soaring graphs and futuristic architectural renderings. I did not stop. I pushed the door open with my shoulder, keeping my head down, my posture hunched. The transformation was not just in the clothes, it was in the spine. I let my shoulders slump forward, erasing the years of military posture, erasing the confidence of a father and a husband. I became the background noise. Braden's voice boomed through the room, smooth and practiced. He was talking about the future, about legacy, about a new residential complex that would redefine luxury living in the city. It was a beautiful lie wrapped in expensive words. I moved to the far corner of the room, dipping the mop into the gray water. The smell of ammonia cut through the aroma of expensive cologne and fresh coffee. No one stopped me. No one even paused their breathing. To them, the room was cleaning itself. I was just a biological robot, a mechanism of maintenance. I worked my way along the wall, inching closer to the head of the table, closer to him. My heart was a cold stone in my chest. This was the man who had destroyed my family, the man who had taken my dignity and laughed while doing it. Every muscle in my body wanted to straighten up to cross the distance between us and end this, but I forced the rage down deep into the pit of my stomach where it burned like acid. Not yet. Patience is the weapon of the righteous. Braden was pacing now, feeding off the energy of the room. He walked toward the side table where a silver carafe of coffee sat on a silver tray. He was still talking, his hands waving in the air, painting pictures of millions of dollars. I was right there, mopping a spot that was already clean just a few feet away. He reached for a porcelain cup without looking. His hand was careless, arrogant. He knocked the cup over. Dark liquid splashed across the polished wood of the side table and cascaded down onto the beige carpet right next to my boots. The room went silent. The spell of his presentation was broken for a split second. Braden stopped. He looked down at the stain and then he looked at me. For the first time his eyes locked onto mine. There was no recognition. There was no humanity. There was only annoyance. It was the look a man gives a malfunctioning toaster. He sighed, loud and theatrical. "Great," he muttered. "Just great." He took a step toward me and I saw his foot lash out. It wasn't a hard kick. It was a nudge, a disrespectful tap of his polished leather shoe against my shin. It was a gesture of dominance, a reminder of who stood tall and who cleaned the floor. "Hey, old man," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You see this? You see what a mess this is?" I nodded slowly, gripping the mop handle so tight the wood creaked under my gloves. "Clean it up," he commanded, pointing at the floor. "And do it fast. This is a boardroom, not a cafeteria. People like you are only good for cleaning up other people's messes, so do your job." The room chuckled, a low ripple of sycophantic laughter. They were laughing at his wit. They were laughing at the old janitor. I felt the blood rushing in my ears, a roar like a waterfall. This was the test. This was the moment where the plan could fail if my pride was stronger than my resolve. If I looked up, if I showed the fire in my eyes, he would know. He would see. I swallowed the bile in my throat. I let the old man take over. "Yes, sir." I mumbled, my voice raspy and weak. "Right away, sir. I am sorry, sir." I dropped to my knees. The ultimate submission. I pulled a rag from my belt and began to dab at the coffee soaking into the carpet. Braden didn't move. He stood right there, enjoying the view of another human being at his feet. "You got some on my shoe," he said. I looked at his shoe. A single drop of coffee sat on the black leather toe. "Clean that too," he said. I froze. This was unnecessary. This was cruel. This was Braden. I reached out with the rag. My hand was shaking, and I let him think it was from fear. I wiped the toe of his shoe, polishing the leather until it gleamed. "There you go," I whispered. "Good as new." While he was looking down at his reflection in the shoe, gloating in his power, I made my move. My other hand, the one hidden by the bulk of the tablecloth hanging over the edge of the conference table, moved with the speed of a magician. I had practiced this motion 1,000 times in the dark. I reached up under the lip of the heavy mahogany table. My fingers found the rough wood of the underside. I pressed the small black disc against the surface. The adhesive bit instantly. It was a military-grade listening device no bigger than a quarter with a battery life of 48 hours. It was done. I pulled my hand back and grabbed the bucket. I stood up, groaning slightly like an old man with bad knees. "All clean, sir," I said, keeping my eyes on his chest. Braden didn't answer. He had already turned back to his audience, the janitor forgotten the moment he was no longer useful. "I apologize for the interruption, gentlemen," he said, his voice regaining its smooth power. "As I was saying, the vision for this project goes beyond simple housing." I backed out of the room. I pulled the heavy door shut until it clicked. The moment the latch engaged, I straightened my spine. I walked down the hallway not as a janitor, but as a hunter who had just set a snare. I didn't stop until I reached the service elevator. I took it down to the basement level, past the loading docks, and out the rear exit. The cold air hit my face, and I breathed it in deep, cleansing the smell of the cleaning fluid from my lungs. My van was parked 3 blocks away, nestled in an alley behind a row of abandoned shops. It was a nondescript gray utility vehicle, rusted at the wheel wells. Inside, it was a fortress of surveillance. I climbed into the back and locked the doors. I stripped off the gray jumpsuit, tossing it into the corner with a mixture of relief and disgust. Underneath, I was wearing dark jeans and a black t-shirt. I was myself again. I sat in the swivel chair and put on the heavy noise-canceling headphones. I flipped the switch on the receiver. Static. Then a burst of noise. Then clarity. The bug was live. I could hear the shuffling of papers. I could hear the murmur of voices as the meeting broke up. I heard the heavy door open and close as the board members left. I heard the silence settle over the room. Then I heard the sound I was waiting for. The click of a lock. The room was empty save for one person. Braden. I heard the distinctive sound of a bottle being opened. Alcohol. He was celebrating. He was pouring a drink. Then the sound of a phone being dialed. I leaned forward, pressing the headphones tighter against my ears. This was it. This was the moment the mask would slip. The ringing stopped. Someone answered on the other end. "It is done," Braden said. His voice was different now. The charm was gone, replaced by a cold, hard edge. "They bought it. Hook, line, and sinker." There was a pause as he listened to the person on the other end. "Yeah, they think the capital is going into construction materials," he laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Idiots. The estimates are inflated by 300%. We will funnel the first tranche of cash through the shell company in Panama by Friday." My hand flew to the notebook on the desk. I wrote down everything. Panama, Friday, shell company. "Don't worry about the oversight," Braden continued. "I have the auditors in my pocket. The real estate project is just a ghost. We dig a hole, we pour some concrete, and we leave it there for 2 years while we wash the money. By the time anyone realizes nothing is being built, we will be long gone." I stopped writing. The pen hovered over the paper. It wasn't just greed. It wasn't just corporate negligence. He was laundering money. He was working for a cartel or a syndicate moving dirty cash through a fake construction project. The man who had humiliated me, who had treated me like dirt on his shoe, was involved in something far darker than I had imagined. Braden continued talking. Yeah, the old man in the hallway earlier almost ruined my rhythm. No, just some janitor. Nobody. He is nothing. Just like the rest of them. Listen, make sure the transfer happens at midnight. I want this clean. The line went dead. I took off the headphones and sat in the silence of the van. The rage that had been burning in my stomach had cooled into something solid, something hard and heavy like a brick of ice. He thought I was nothing. He thought I was just a stain on his floor to be wiped away. He was wrong. I looked at the notes on the paper. I had the time, I had the method, I had the crime. Braden wasn't just a bad businessman. He was a criminal, and I was the only person in the world who knew his secret. I reached into my bag and pulled out a fresh hard drive. I backed up the audio file immediately. 2 copies. Always 2 copies. I looked at the screen where the audio waveform was still flatlining in the silence of the empty boardroom. You made a mistake, Braden, I whispered to the empty van. You should have looked at the janitor's eyes. Now I knew where the money was going. Now I knew the timeline. Friday. Midnight. I had 3 days. 3 days to turn his ghost project into his grave. I started the engine of the van. The vibration rumbled through the floorboards. It was time to go to work. The janitor was gone. The soldier was back. And the war had just begun. The air conditioning in the back of the van hummed a low, steady rhythm that matched the beating of my heart. On the screen in front of me, the high-definition feed showed every bead of sweat forming on Braden's forehead. He was sitting in the plush leather chair of Marcus's office, the office I had paid for, the office that was the stage for his destruction. Marcus played his part perfectly. He leaned back, steepling his fingers, looking every inch the skeptical investor. I spoke into the microphone, my voice distorted and fed directly into Marcus's hidden earpiece. Tell him we are impressed, I said, my voice cold and flat. Tell him the board loves the vision. Marcus smiled, a shark-like grin that made Braden relax his shoulders. Braden, Marcus said, his voice smooth as silk. The board is impressed. They think your vision for the complex is revolutionary. They are ready to move forward. Braden let out a breath he had been holding. He adjusted his tie, a flash of that old arrogance returning to his eyes. I knew they would see the potential, he said, leaning forward. This is going to be the biggest development in the city. Wait, I commanded into the mic. Drop the hammer now. Marcus held up a hand, stopping Braden's victory lap. However, Marcus continued, his tone shifting just enough to introduce a razor-thin edge of tension. Given the scale of the investment and the current volatility of the market, the board has one condition, a standard procedure for high-risk ventures. Braden froze. Condition, he asked. We need proof of liquidity, Marcus said. We need to see that you have skin in the game. We require a 20% deposit of the projected capital in the escrow account by Friday. Braden blinked. He did the math in his head. I could see his eyes darting back and forth. 20%, he stammered. That is $2 million. Correct, Marcus said, not missing a beat. 2 million. It is just a formality, Braden. A show of good faith. Once the papers are signed, the funds are released back into the project budget. Surely a man of your resources has access to that kind of liquid capital. The trap snapped shut. If Braden said no, he admitted he was broke. He admitted he was a fraud living on credit and lies. The deal would vanish, and with it his only chance to pay off the syndicate laundering money through his ghost project. If he said yes, he had 48 hours to find $2 million he did not have. Braden swallowed hard. I watched his Adam's apple bob in his throat. He forced a smile, but it looked like a rictus of pain. Of course, he said, his voice cracking slightly. 2 million. No problem. I will have it wired by Friday. Excellent, Marcus said, standing up and extending his hand. We look forward to doing business. Braden shook the hand, limp and sweaty. He walked out of the office with the stiff gait of a man walking to the gallows. I leaned back in my chair in the van. The first domino had fallen. Now I just had to watch him run. I switched the feed to the tracking software on his phone. Braden didn't go home. He didn't go to his office. He went to the bank. I tapped into the audio from his car. He was screaming at someone on the phone. What do you mean I am over-leveraged? He yelled, slamming his hand against the steering wheel. I have millions in assets. The penthouse alone is worth 4. I listened as the banker on the other end calmly explained that the penthouse was already mortgaged to the hilt. Braden had taken out a second and a third loan against it to fund his lavish lifestyle and his wife's shopping habits. "I need cash," Braden screamed. "I do not need a lecture on equity. Get me a bridge loan. Sell the portfolio. I don't care about the penalties, just liquidate it." He drove like a maniac, weaving through traffic. He stopped at a high-end car dealership, not to buy, to sell. I watched through the long lens of my camera from down the street as he argued with the dealer. He was trying to sell his McLaren, the car he posted on social media every week with captions about success and grinding. He was practically begging the dealer to take it for cash on the spot. He left the dealership in a taxi. He looked smaller. The suit didn't fit him as well anymore. The armor of wealth was falling off piece by piece. Then the tracker showed him moving toward the bad part of town, the warehouse district. I knew who operated down there, loan sharks. The kind of men who didn't ask for credit scores but asked for fingers if you missed a payment. Braden was desperate. He was borrowing blood money to pay for a fake deposit on a project that didn't exist to impress a fake investor controlled by the man he thought he had destroyed. Ideally, he would dig a hole so deep he could never climb out. While Braden was selling his soul piece by piece, his wife Tiffany was finding out that the fairy tale had an expiration date. I switched the audio feed to the bug I had planted in her purse. She was at the Glow Spa, one of those places that charged $1,000 to put cucumber slices on your eyes. I could hear the soft Zen music in the background. I could hear the hushed tones of the receptionist. Mrs. Sterling, the receptionist, said, her voice polite but firm. "I am afraid the card was declined." There was a pause, the silence of absolute shock. "Try it again," Tiffany snapped. "It is a black card. It has no limit." "I tried it 3 times, ma'am," the receptionist said. "It is coming back declined. Do you have another form of payment?" "Do you know who my husband is?" Tiffany hissed. "He owns half this city. This machine must be broken. This is embarrassing. Fix it." "I am sorry, ma'am. There is nothing I can do." I heard the sound of a zipper. She was frantically digging for another card. "Try this one," she said. Declined. And this one. Declined. I sat in the dark van and let out a breath. I remembered how Tiffany used to look at me when I was just the help, the way she would look through me. Now she was standing in a lobby in a robe, realizing that the golden ticket she had married was made of fool's gold. She stormed out of the spa. I heard the car door slam. Then she dialed Braden. Pick up, pick up, pick up," she muttered. The line clicked. What Braden barked. He sounded breathless, terrified. "My cards are not working," Tiffany screamed. "I am at the spa. Braden, they cut up my card. They humiliated me. What is going on?" "Shut up," Braden roared. His voice was so loud it distorted the microphone. "Just shut up, Tiffany. I am handling business. The accounts are frozen for a transfer. It is a security measure." "A security measure?" Tiffany laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. The lady at the counter said, "Insufficient funds, Braden. You told me we were rich. You told me I never had to worry." "We are rich," Braden yelled. "I am just moving some assets around." "Stop spending money for 1 second, you leech. Go home. Do not buy anything. Do not go anywhere. Just go home." He hung up on her. I watched the GPS dot that represented Tiffany sit still for a long time. The cracks were not just in the bank account. They were in the marriage. They were in the foundation of lies they had built their life on. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city. Braden was running out of time. He had the car money. He had the loan shark money. But he was still short. I calculated he was still about $200,000 shy of the $2 million mark. He was sitting in his car, parked on a quiet side street. I could hear his heavy breathing through the bug. He was muttering to himself, cursing, hitting the dashboard. Think, Braden, think. Who has cash? Who is liquid? He went through his contacts. He called friends who didn't answer. He called business partners who suddenly had to go into tunnels. The smell of failure was on him, and rats can always smell when the ship is sinking. Then he went quiet. A long, terrifying silence. "I know," he whispered. My heart skipped a beat. Who did he know? "The old man," he said softly. "The old fool." My burner phone, the old flip phone I had kept active for exactly this moment, lit up on the dashboard of the van. It was him. I stared at the screen. The audacity, the sheer, absolute lack of a soul. He was calling me. The man he had mocked, the man he had fired, the man whose life he had ruined. I let it ring twice. I cleared my throat. I hunched my shoulders even though he couldn't see me, letting the character take over. I answered. "Hello," I said, my voice trembling and old. "Hey, old-timer," Braden said. His voice was fake, cheerful, a manic edge to it that made my skin crawl. "It is Braden, your old boss." "Mr. Braden," I said. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Listen, I was thinking about you," Braden said, speaking fast. "I know things ended rough between us, but I have a heart, you know. I want to help you out." "Help me?" I asked. "Yeah," Braden said. "I have this investment opportunity, guaranteed return, triple your money in a week, but you have to get in now, tonight." I stayed silent, letting him sweat. "I don't have any money." "Mr. Braden," I said. "You know that." "Come on." Braden pressed, his voice hardening. "Don't lie to me. I know about the insurance policy. For your daughter. Keisha Wright. That tragic accident. I know you have that payout sitting in a savings account doing nothing." The air in the van turned to ice. He said her name. He said Keisha's name. He knew about the life insurance, the small amount of money that was the only thing left of my daughter, the money I was saving to build a memorial for her. And he wanted it, to save his own skin. "It is safe," Braden said. "Safer than a bank. You withdraw that cash, you give it to me tonight, and I will give you 10% on top by Monday. I am doing you a favor here, old man. 10% is free money." My hand gripped the phone so hard the plastic creaked. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive the van through his car and end it right there. But I didn't. I couldn't. 10%, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. 10%, Braden promised. "Just bring the cash to the construction site. Tonight. Midnight. Don't tell anyone." This is an exclusive deal. He was trying to rob me. He was trying to steal the blood money from a grieving father, to pay a deposit on a fake project, to launder money for a cartel. It was a level of evil that was almost impressive in its purity. I took a deep breath. I pushed the rage down into the engine room of my soul, where it would fuel what came next. "Okay, Mr. Braden," I said. "I will bring it. I want to help." "Good man," Braden said. "Midnight. Don't be late." He hung up. I sat in the darkness of the van. The screen in front of me glowed green. He took the bait. He was desperate enough to steal from the dead. I looked at the clock. 4 hours until midnight. I didn't need the money. I had plenty. But I would bring a bag. I would bring a bag filled with cut paper and a single tracking device. But more importantly, I would bring myself. Braden wanted a meeting at the construction site, a dark, isolated place full of deep holes and sharp edges. He thought he was meeting a helpless old man he could bully and rob. He had no idea he was inviting the Reaper to his doorstep. I reached under the seat and pulled out the black tactical case. I opened it. Inside, the tools of my old trade gleamed in the dim light. Tonight, the financial trap closed. But tonight, the physical trap opened. I started the van. "I am coming, Braden," I whispered. "And I am bringing exactly what you deserve." The blueprint was yellowed at the edges. It smelled of cedar and old dust, a scent that instantly transported me back 20 years. I sat in the surveillance van, the only light coming from the small desk lamp illuminating the wide sheet of paper spread out before me. To anyone else, this was just a drawing of a house, lines and measurements, elevations and floor plans. But to me, it was a memory frozen in ink. Braden had sold the townhouse on Oak Street 6 months ago. He had bragged about the sale. He had boasted about the profit margin, claiming he had flipped the property for a cool $1 million in pure profit. He had used that money to put the down payment on his penthouse. He thought he was a real estate genius. He thought he had squeezed every drop of value out of the old asset. He was wrong. I ran my finger along the bottom edge of the blueprint. There, right next to the stamp of the city architect, was my signature. Not as the owner, as the designer. I didn't just buy that house years ago. I built it. I designed the foundation. I poured the concrete. And because I was a man who planned for everything, a man who knew that the world could be cruel and unpredictable, I had buried a secret deep in the legal bedrock of that property. I opened a separate file folder, one that I had retrieved from a safety deposit box that hadn't been opened since the day of Keisha's funeral. Inside was a deed, but not a deed for a house, a deed for the land. 20 years ago, I had separated the two. It was a legal maneuver designed to protect my assets in case my business ever went under. I had placed the land, the actual dirt the house sat on, into an irrevocable trust. The Keisha Trust. It was named after my daughter. It was meant to be her nest egg, her safety net. When Braden took over my company, when he seized my assets and forced me out, he took the house. He saw the title for the structure, and his greed made him blind. He never looked deeper. He never ran a full title search on the land itself because he was too cheap to pay for a proper lawyer and too arrogant to think he could make a mistake. He had sold the house to a wealthy tech entrepreneur named Vance. Braden had taken Vance's money. He had transferred the title of the building, but he had never transferred the land. Legally, Braden had sold a box of air. The house was sitting on ground that belonged to my dead daughter, and the terms of the trust were clear. If the structure was sold without the landowner had the right to charge rent, retroactive rent, or worse, they could demand the removal of the structure. It was fraud, pure and simple. Braden had sold property he did not fully own. I picked up a thick manila envelope. Inside were copies of the land deed, the trust documents, and a highlighted clause in the original property agreement. I also included a calculation of the ground rent owed for the past 10 years plus interest. It was a staggering sum. I didn't send this to Braden. That would give him time to wiggle, time to bribe. I sent it to Vance. I called a courier service. A bike messenger arrived at the alley entrance 10 minutes later. I handed him the envelope and a wad of cash. "Deliver this to Mr. Vance at his downtown office," I said. "Do not say who sent it. Just say it is regarding the foundation of his home." The messenger nodded and vanished into the city traffic. I sat back and put on my headphones, switching the audio feed to Braden's office. He was currently yelling at his assistant about the coffee order. He was stressed about the $2 million deposit for the Kingston project, but he still felt like he was in control. He still thought he could juggle the chainsaws. 2 hours passed. The silence in the van was heavy, filled with the anticipation of the explosion. Then Braden's phone rang. It wasn't his personal cell. It was the red line. The direct line for high-priority legal matters. Braden answered it, his voice tight. "What is it?" he snapped. "I am busy." There was a pause. I could hear the tinny voice of his general counsel on the other end, but I couldn't make out the words. I didn't need to. I could read the reaction on Braden's face through the hidden camera in his office. The color drained from his skin. It started at his cheeks and washed down his neck, leaving him looking like a corpse in a $3,000 suit. He sank into his leather chair, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. "Say that again," Braden whispered. The lawyer spoke again. This time Braden didn't interrupt. He listened, his eyes widening with every second. "That is impossible," Braden shouted suddenly, jumping to his feet. "I own that house. I sold it fair and square. The title was clean." He listened again. He began to pace frantically, pulling at his collar. "What do you mean a ground lease?" he yelled. "What do you mean a trust? Who is Keisha?" The name hung in the air. Even through the digital feed, the sound of my daughter's name coming from his mouth sent a shiver of cold fury down my spine. Braden stopped pacing. He leaned against his desk, looking like he was about to vomit. "Fraud," he stammered. "Vance is suing for fraud. He wants the sale reversed. He wants punitive damages. He wants my head on a platter." The lawyer on the other line delivered the final blow. "My accounts," Braden shrieked. "What do you mean frozen? You can't freeze my accounts. I have a transfer to make on Friday. I need liquidity." He slammed the phone down. He looked wild. His hair was disheveled, his eyes darting around the room as if the walls were closing in. And they were. Mr. Vance wasn't just a buyer. He was a shark. I had done my research. Vance didn't negotiate. He destroyed. The moment he received the file, he must have called his legal team and filed an emergency injunction. He had accused Braden of selling him a lemon, a house with no land, and he had locked down Braden's assets to ensure he got his money back. Braden's personal accounts, his business operating accounts, his investment portfolio. All of it was now under a court-ordered freeze pending the investigation into the real estate fraud. The $2 million he had scraped together from the loan sharks and the car sale was sitting in an account he could no longer touch. It was sitting right there on his screen, but it might as well have been on the moon. Braden let out a scream of pure, primal frustration. He swept his arm across his desk, sending his computer monitor, his expensive crystal decanter, and his stack of files crashing to the floor. He collapsed onto the carpet, surrounded by the wreckage of his ego. He pulled his knees to his chest. rocking back and forth. "This cannot be happening," he muttered. "Not now. Not when I am so close." He was trapped in a perfect storm. To unlock his accounts, he needed to settle with Vance. That would cost him at least $1 million plus legal fees. Money he didn't have access to. To secure the Kingston deal and get the money laundering flowing, he needed to pay the $2 million deposit by Friday. If he missed that deadline, the cartel would come asking questions. And they didn't sue. They eliminated. He had no access to his own money. He had no credit. His wife's cards were declining. The loan sharks were expecting their first VIG payment next week. He was drowning in dry land. I watched him unravel. I watched the man who had fired me for being too old and too cautious, realizing that he had missed the most important detail of all. You build a house on rock, not on sand. And you never sell what isn't yours. Braden crawled over to his overturned chair. He fumbled in his pocket for his phone. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped it twice. He dialed a number. "Pick up, pick up, pick up," he begged, his voice cracking. My burner phone lit up in the van. It was him again. He was calling the old man. He was calling the janitor. He was calling the only person in the world he thought he could still manipulate. I let it ring 3 times. Let the fear marinate. Let the desperation soak into his bones. I answered, my voice weary and confused. "Hello, Mr. Braden." Braden didn't even say hello. He sounded like a man sobbing on the edge of a cliff. "The deal has changed, old man," he gasped. "I need that cash. The insurance money. I need it tonight. Right now." "Mr. Braden, it is late," I said, feigning hesitation. "I don't care what time it is," Braden screamed. "Bring it to me. Bring it to the site. I will give you 15%. No 20% return. Just bring me the cash." He wasn't just greedy anymore. He was terrified. He needed liquid cash to bribe Vance or to pay a lawyer under the table to lift the freeze for 24 hours. He needed untraceable money to plug the hole in the dam before the whole river came crashing down. He was trying to rob me to save himself from the trap I had set. "I know you have it," Braden pleaded. "You said you kept it safe. Cash it out. Bring it to me. I am begging you." The mighty Braden. Begging a janitor. "Okay, Mr. Braden," I said softly. "I will bring it. I will help you." "Hurry," Braden choked out. "Please just hurry." He hung up. I looked at the screen where he was still sitting on the floor amidst the broken glass of his office. He looked small, he looked pathetic, but I felt no pity. I remembered the day he fired me. I remembered the day I lost my health insurance. I remembered the day Keisha died because I couldn't afford the specialist she needed. This wasn't cruelty, this was balance. I checked my watch. The sun had set hours ago. The city was dark. The financial trap had snapped shut. The legal trap had locked his legs. Now it was time for the final movement. I reached for the gray jumpsuit. I wouldn't need it for much longer. Tonight, I would look him in the eye. Tonight he would see me, not as the help, not as the victim, but as the architect of his ruin. I packed the bag. I checked the tracker. I checked the small, heavy object in my pocket. It was time to go to the construction site. It was time to close the loop. I turned off the monitors. The van went dark. "See you soon, Braden," I whispered. The engine roared to life, and I drove into the night, headed for the ghost project where a desperate man was waiting for a savior who was actually his executioner. The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Hotel ballroom cast a fracturing light over the assembly of the city's elite. It was a sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns, a moving ocean of diamonds and silk. The air smelled of expensive perfume and aged champagne, but underneath it all, if you breathed in deep enough, you could smell the rot. It was the scent of desperation. Braden stood at the center of the room, holding a flute of sparkling wine like a scepter. He was smiling that wide, practiced smile of a politician or a predator. He was laughing at jokes that weren't funny and shaking hands with men he despised. To the casual observer, he looked like a king holding court. He looked like a man on top of the world launching a campaign that would cement his power. But I knew better. I knew that the suit he was wearing was likely charged to a credit card that was hours away from being declined. I knew that the champagne flowing so freely was bought on a promise of payment that would never come. I knew that his eyes kept darting to the door, not in anticipation of guests, but in fear of process servers or police. He was drowning. And this party was his last gasp for air. He needed investors. He needed fresh blood. He needed the Kingston capital to legitimize the fraud before the house of cards collapsed. I watched him from the tinted window of the black limousine parked just down the street. The engine idled with a low, powerful hum, a stark contrast to the rattling van I had lived in for the past week. I looked down at my hands. They were scrubbed clean. The calluses from the mop handle were still there, but tonight they were hidden beneath the finest wool cuff. I adjusted the silk tie at my neck. It felt strange. For so long I had worn the uniform of the invisible man, the gray jumpsuit of the janitor. Tonight I was wearing armor. Beside me sat Marcus. He looked impeccable in a midnight blue tuxedo, his face set in a mask of professional indifference. He was the perfect lieutenant, the bridge between the old world and the new. And across from us sat Keisha. My breath caught in my throat every time I looked at her. For months, Braden and his wife believed she was gone or broken, a tragic story used to elicit pity or scorn. They thought the insurance money was a payout for a life lost or a life ruined. They didn't know about the experimental treatments. They didn't know about the private rehabilitation clinic I had funded with the last of my real savings before the crash. They didn't know she was a fighter just like her father. She looked breathtaking. She was wearing a gown of emerald green silk that flowed over her like water. Her hair was pulled back, revealing a face that had known pain, but now showed only steel. She wasn't the sick girl in the hospital bed anymore. She was a queen returning to claim her kingdom. "Are you ready?" I asked her. My voice quiet in the plush interior of the car. She looked out the window at the glowing entrance of the hotel. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "I am ready, Dad," she said. "I want to see their faces. I want them to see me." "Then let us go," Marcus said, checking his watch. "The curtain is up." The driver pulled the car forward, gliding smoothly to the red carpet entrance. The valet stepped forward, his eyes widening as he saw the diplomatic flags on the fenders of the car. A nice touch Marcus had arranged. The door opened and the flashbulbs erupted. I stepped out first. The cool night air hit my face, but this time I didn't shiver. I stood tall, my spine straight, my shoulders back. I buttoned my jacket with a slow, deliberate movement. I wasn't the old man with the bad knee. I wasn't the servant. I was power. I turned and offered my hand to Keisha. She stepped out into the light, and for a second the paparazzi went silent. They didn't know who she was, but they knew she was someone. She carried herself with an elegance that money couldn't buy. We walked up the red carpet, Marcus flanking us on the left. The security guards at the door, huge men with earpieces, stepped aside instinctively. We didn't look like people who needed to show invitations. We looked like people who owned the building. We entered the foyer. The noise of the party spilled out from the double doors ahead. Laughter, music, the clinking of glass, and there, standing guard like a dragon at the gate of a treasure she didn't own, was Tiffany. She was wearing a dress that was too loud, too sparkly, too desperate. She was directing the staff, snapping her fingers at waiters checking the guest list with a manic intensity. She was the gatekeeper, ensuring that only the useful people got in. She turned as we approached. At first her eyes scanned over us, registering only the clothes, the aura of wealth. A smile began to form on her lips, the sycophantic smile she reserved for potential donors. Then she looked closer. Her eyes locked onto Keisha. The recognition hit her like a physical blow. Her smile faltered, twitched, and died. Then her gaze slid to me. She squinted, trying to reconcile the distinguished man in the tuxedo with the memory of the hunched figure pushing a broom. The realization washed over her face. It wasn't fear yet. It was indignation. It was the fury of a woman who believes the help has forgotten their place. She marched toward us, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. She held up a hand, palm out, a gesture of absolute dismissal. "Stop right there," she hissed, her voice cutting through the ambient music. We stopped. I looked at her with a polite, detached curiosity, as if she were a rude waitress in a restaurant I was buying. "What do you think you are doing here?" Tiffany demanded, her voice rising in pitch. "Security!" she screamed, waving at the large men by the door. "Get over here, now!" The guards hesitated, looking between the screaming woman in the glittery dress and the calm, imposing trio standing before them. Tiffany turned back to us, her face twisting into a sneer. "I do not know where you stole those clothes," she spat at me. "And you," she pointed a manicured finger at Keisha. "I thought you were in a charity ward somewhere. What are you doing here? Did you come to beg?" She laughed a high-pitched sound that grated on the nerves. That is it, isn't it? You heard Braden was having a big party. You heard there was money in the room. So you dressed up in rental costumes and came to panhandle. You came to ask my husband for a handout because you blew through your little insurance payout. She stepped closer, invading my personal space. I could smell the alcohol on her breath, masked by mints. You are pathetic, she whispered. You are trash. You will always be trash. Get out before I have you thrown into the gutter where you belong. The lobby had gone quiet. Guests who were entering stopped to watch. People inside the ballroom were turning their heads, peering out through the open doors. Braden was somewhere in there, oblivious that his wife was setting fire to his lifeline. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her. I looked at the fear behind the anger. I looked at the cracks in her foundation. Keisha stepped forward. She didn't yell. She didn't get angry. Yet, she just smiled a cold, serene smile that was far more terrifying than any threat. Hello, Tiffany, Keisha said, her voice smooth and cultured. It is a lovely party. It almost looks real. Tiffany gasped, her face turning a blotchy red. How dare you, she shrieked. Security! Throw these beggars out. I want them arrested for trespassing. The head of security, a man I knew from my days cleaning the building, stepped forward. He looked uncomfortable. He looked at me, and I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He remembered the nights I had shared my coffee with him. He remembered the man who worked harder than anyone else. Mrs. Sterling, he said quietly. Maybe we should just ask them to leave quietly. No, Tiffany yelled, stomping her foot. Drag them out, make a scene. I want everyone to see what happens when the rats try to crash the palace. It was time. Marcus stepped forward. He moved with the weight of authority, placing himself between Tiffany and me. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He projected his voice just enough so that it carried into the silent ballroom, so that the investors and the board members and the press could hear every syllable. Excuse me, Mrs. Sterling. Marcus said, his tone dripping with icy politeness. I believe there has been a misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding, Tiffany snapped. These people are nobodies. They are former employees. They are unwanted. Marcus adjusted his cuffs. He looked at Tiffany with a mixture of pity and disdain. Mrs. Sterling, I would be very careful with your tone, he said. He gestured to me with an open hand, a presentation of power. This is not a beggar. This is not an employee. He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the tension build until it was palpable. This is Mr. Otis King. Marcus announced, his voice ringing off the marble walls. Otis King, the name of the shell company, the name on the contracts, the name on the $2 million deposit requirement. Tiffany froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The name registered. She knew the name. Braden had been talking about it for days. The mysterious investor, the savior, the chairman of Kingston Holdings. Marcus continued, his voice sharpening like a blade. He is the chairman of the board of Kingston Holdings. He is the majority shareholder of the capital group your husband has been begging for the last month. Marcus took a step closer to Tiffany, lowering his voice to a lethal whisper that was somehow louder than her screaming. He is the man holding the pen on the $50 million investment that is the only thing keeping your husband out of prison. I watched the color drain from Tiffany's face. It was identical to the way it had drained from Braden's face in the office. The realization hit her like a physical weight. She had just called the man who owned her future a beggar. And if Mr. King is not allowed entry, Marcus said, checking his watch casually, if he is insulted or detained or inconvenienced in any way, then the Kingston deal is dead. The capital is withdrawn. And I imagine your husband will be very interested to know exactly why his project evaporated on the night of his triumph. Marcus looked at the security guards. Gentlemen, stand down. The guards stepped back, instantly relieved to be out of the line of fire. Marcus looked back at Tiffany, who was now trembling, her hands shaking by her sides. Now, Marcus said, you will step aside. You will apologize to Mr. King and his daughter, and you will welcome us into the party. I stepped forward. I looked Tiffany in the eye. I saw the terror there. I saw the sudden understanding that the hierarchy she believed in the world, where she was above and I was below, had just inverted. I adjusted my jacket. After you, Mrs. Sterling, I said, my voice calm and deep. My partner is waiting. Tiffany stepped back. She almost stumbled in her haste to get out of the way. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. I walked past her. Keisha took my arm, her head held high. We crossed the threshold into the ballroom. The room was silent as we entered. Hundreds of eyes turned toward us. And at the far end of the room, standing on a small stage with a microphone in his hand, was Braden. He looked up. He saw Marcus. He smiled, relief washing over his face. Then he saw me. The smile died. The microphone slipped in his sweaty hand, causing a screech of feedback that tore through the room. I locked eyes with him across the expanse of the ballroom. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of the wolf who has just entered the sheepfold and locked the gate behind him. The party had officially begun. The applause was polite but enthusiastic, a ripple of sound that filled the cavernous ballroom. Braden stood at the podium basking in it. He looked like the golden boy of the city. The lights caught the shine of his hair and the gleam of his teeth. He raised his hands for silence, acting humble, acting grateful. It was a performance worthy of an award. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with fake emotion. "Thank you all. When I look out at this room, I do not just see investors. I do not just see business partners. I see family." He paused for effect, letting the word hang in the air. "Family," he repeated. "That is the cornerstone of everything we build. A skyscraper is only as strong as its foundation, and a man is only as strong as the people who stand beside him. Integrity, loyalty, love. These are not just words to me. They are the currency of my soul." I sat at table 1, the table reserved for the guest of honor, directly in front of the stage. The tablecloth was white linen, the centerpiece a towering arrangement of white orchids. I took a sip of water. It tasted cold and clean. I watched him lie. I watched him sell a version of himself that didn't exist. It was nauseating. It was fascinating. He was weaving a tapestry of morality while standing in a suit paid for with stolen money. Braden continued, his eyes scanning the back of the room, avoiding the front row as if he sensed a predator nearby. "That is why this new project is so close to my heart," he said. "It is not just about profits. It is about building a community, a place where families can grow, a legacy that we can leave to our children." He finally looked down. He looked at the front table. He looked at the placard that read Kingston Holdings, Mr. Otis King. And then he looked at me. The microphone didn't drop, but his hand spasmed. The feedback squeal was short and sharp like a yelp of pain. His eyes widened. He blinked once, twice. He stopped breathing. He saw the tuxedo. He saw the expensive haircut. He saw the power radiating from the table, but then he looked deeper. He saw the eyes of the man he had called a nothing, the eyes of the man he had kicked, the eyes of the janitor. His brain tried to reject the image. It was a glitch in his reality. The janitor could not be the chairman. The victim could not be the savior. It was impossible. But the fear told him it was true. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like a physical curtain falling. His mouth opened, but the speech about family values died in his throat. He stood there, frozen, a deer staring into the headlights of a freight train. The silence in the room stretched. People started to shift in their seats. They whispered, "Why did he stop? Is he sick?" I didn't give him time to recover. I didn't give him time to faint or run or call for help. I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor, a harsh sound that cut through the murmurs. I buttoned my jacket. I walked toward the stairs at the side of the stage. My steps were slow and deliberate. Every footfall was a gavel banging down. Braden watched me come. He was paralyzed. He was trapped in a paradox. He needed Otis King to save his project. He needed the $50 million. But Otis King was the man he had destroyed. If he called security, he lost the money. If he let me speak, he lost everything else. Greed won. Greed paralyzed him. He stood there hoping, praying that this was some kind of twisted game, that I was there to save him after all. I walked up the stairs. The spotlight followed me, blindingly bright. I stepped up to the podium. Braden was shaking. I could smell the fear on him, a sour, acrid scent that cut through his cologne. He took a half step back, yielding the ground, yielding the microphone. I reached out and took it from his hand. His fingers were cold and clammy. I turned to the audience. I smiled. It was the smile of a judge delivering a death sentence. "Thank you, Braden," I said, my voice booming through the high-quality sound system. That was moving. Truly moving. The audience applauded, politely confused but willing to go along with the show. They thought this was part of the program, the introduction of the mysterious investor. I looked out at the sea of faces. The city council members, the bankers, the socialites. Mr. Sterling speaks very eloquently about family. I continued, my voice calm and conversational. He speaks about foundations, about loyalty, about legacy. I turned and looked at Braden. He was trembling visibly now. But there are a few chapters of his story that he forgot to mention tonight, I said. A few details that perhaps slipped his mind in all the excitement. I looked back at the crowd. He forgot to tell you how he treats the family he already had. He forgot to tell you about the winter 5 years ago. The room went deadly silent. He forgot to mention how he threw his first wife, his loyal partner, the woman who built his first company with her own savings, out onto the street in the middle of December. He forgot to mention that he changed the locks while she was at the doctor. He forgot to mention that he left her with nothing, not even a coat, because she was no longer useful to his image. A gasp ran through the room. I saw Tiffany in the front row, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. She didn't know this part of the story. No one did. Braden made a sound, a choked gurgle of protest, but he didn't move. He couldn't. And he forgot to mention the foundation of this new project. I said, my voice hardening, losing the warmth, becoming cold steel. He talks about capital. He talks about vision. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. It was a photocopy of a promissory note. He forgot to mention the $2 million he borrowed 3 days ago, not from a bank, not from an investor, but from the kind of men who break legs for interest. He forgot to mention that he leveraged a property he does not legally own to secure a loan to defraud my company. Braden lunged. It was a desperate, clumsy movement. He tried to grab the microphone. That is a lie, he screamed, his voice cracking. Security! Get him off the stage. I sidestepped him easily. He stumbled, almost falling off the podium. He looked pathetic. He looked guilty. Marcus stood up at table 1. He raised a hand. The projector, I said into the microphone. Behind us, the massive screen that had been displaying the architectural renderings flickered. The beautiful futuristic buildings vanished. The image changed. It was grainy footage, low angle, hidden camera quality. But the picture was clear enough. It was the conference room. It was 3 days ago. The audience saw the janitor on his knees scrubbing the carpet. They saw the gray jumpsuit. They saw the hunched shoulders. And they saw Braden. They saw him standing over the old man. They saw the sneer on his face. They saw his lips move, and even though there was no audio on this clip, the body language screamed of cruelty. Then they saw the kick. It wasn't a violent kick. It was worse. It was dismissive. It was the kick you'd give a stray dog. It was a kick that said, "You are nothing. You are dirt. You exist only to serve me." The ballroom gasped. A collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the room. This was the man who had just spoken about integrity. This was the man who claimed to value people. Braden stared at the screen, his face a mask of horror. He was watching his own soul being exposed. But I wasn't done. Turn up the sound, I commanded. The speakers crackled. The video faded and was replaced by a waveform. An audio recording. It was clear. Crystal clear. The voice of Braden filled the room, amplified 1,000 times. They think the capital is going into construction materials. Idiots. The estimates are inflated by 300%. We will funnel the first tranche of cash through the shell company in Panama by Friday. The crowd began to murmur. The murmur turned into a roar. Don't worry about the oversight. Braden's recorded voice continued, arrogant and damning. The real estate project is just a ghost. We dig a hole, we pour some concrete, and we leave it there for 2 years while we wash the money. By the time anyone realizes nothing is being built, we will be long gone. Pandemonium. People were standing up, chairs were being knocked over, shouts of anger, shouts of disbelief. I looked at Braden. He had collapsed against the podium. He was sliding down to the floor. He looked small. He looked broken. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with tears of self-pity. "Who are you?" he whispered. I leaned down close to the microphone so the whole room could hear the answer, so the investors could hear, so his wife could hear, so the police who I knew were waiting in the lobby could hear. "I am the janitor," I said. "I am the man you kicked. I am the man you fired." I straightened up and looked down at him with cold indifference. "And I am the man who just bought your debt." I dropped the microphone. It hit the stage with a heavy thud, a sound like a coffin lid closing. I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The sharks were already circling. The water was already full of blood. and Braden was sinking fast. The ballroom was no longer a place of celebration, it was a crime scene where a reputation had just been murdered in front of 500 witnesses. The silence that followed the dropping of the microphone lasted only a heartbeat before it was replaced by a roar. It was the sound of shock, the sound of betrayal, the sound of wealthy people realizing they had been played for fools. The investors were shouting at their aides. The board members were loosening their ties as if the air had suddenly become too thin to breathe. I stood at the edge of the stage looking down at the wreckage I had created. Braden was still slumped against the podium, a man whose strings had been cut. He looked hollow. The arrogance that had fueled him for years had evaporated, leaving behind only a terrified child in a suit he couldn't afford. Then the doors at the back of the room swung open. They didn't slam. They opened with the heavy, synchronized precision of authority, the Economic Crimes Unit. They didn't rush in with guns drawn. They didn't need to. They simply lined the back wall, a row of dark uniforms standing in stark contrast to the glitter of the gala. They crossed their arms and waited. They were the vultures waiting for the animal to stop twitching. They knew there was no exit. They knew the show was over. Braden saw them. His eyes bulged. He tried to stand up, scrabbling against the wood of the podium, but his legs wouldn't support him. He looked for an ally. He looked for a friend. He looked for anyone who could pull him out of the grave he had dug. He looked at Tiffany. She was standing in the front row, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Her face was a mask of fury. But it wasn't the fury of a wife defending her husband. It was the fury of a consumer who realizes she has bought a counterfeit product. She didn't run to him to comfort him. She didn't offer him a hand. She stormed the stairs. Her heels hammered against the wood of the stage, a staccato rhythm of rage. She marched up to him, her expensive dress rustling with violence. Braden looked up at her, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Tiffany," he whispered, reaching out a hand. "Baby, please." She slapped him. It wasn't a theatrical slap. It was a blow meant to hurt. It cracked through the room, echoing off the high ceilings. Braden's head snapped back. A line of blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. "You liar!" she screamed. Her voice was shrill, tearing through the murmurs of the crowd. "You told me you were a millionaire. You told me the money was real." Tiffany, Braden gasped, holding his cheek. "Listen to me. I listened to you," she shrieked. "I listened to you for 2 years. You told me we owned the city. You told me I could have anything." She grabbed the lapels of his jacket and shook him. "My cards were declined, Braden. At the spa. In front of everyone. Do you know what that felt like? Do you know how humiliated I was?" She wasn't talking about his crimes. She wasn't talking about the fraud or the money laundering or the lives he had ruined. She was talking about her embarrassment. She was talking about her inconvenience. She grabbed his left hand and yanked it up, staring at the empty space on her own finger where a massive diamond used to sit. "And my ring," she yelled. "I went to the safe, Braden. I went to get my grandmother's ring. The one you said we needed to have cleaned. It is gone." Braden looked away, unable to meet her eyes. "I needed the collateral," he mumbled. "I was going to buy it back. Once the Kingston deal went through, I was going to buy it back." "You pawned it!" she screamed, pushing him away with disgust. "You pawned my heritage to save your fake empire. You are not a king, Braden. You are a thief. You are a loser." She spat on the floor next to him. I sat there watching them devour each other. It was fitting. They were two parasites who had fed on the same host, and now that the host was dead, they were turning on each other. Tiffany turned away from him. She smoothed her dress, trying to regain some semblance of composure. She looked out at the crowd, seeing the judgment in their eyes. She needed a life raft. She needed a new narrative. Her eyes landed on me. I was standing a few feet away, flanked by Marcus and Keisha. I was the man in the tuxedo, the man with the power, the man who had just exposed the truth. Tiffany's face changed instantly. The rage vanished, replaced by a look of pleading innocence that was so manufactured it made my stomach turn. She walked toward me, her hands clasped together in a prayer-like gesture. "Mr. King," she said, her voice trembling with fake emotion. "Or Otis. Can I call you Otis?" I didn't answer. I just looked at her. "Otis, please," she said, tears welling up in her eyes on command. "You have to believe me. I didn't know. I had no idea what he was doing." She gestured back at Braden, who was watching her with a look of utter betrayal. He lied to me too, she sobbed. I am a victim here, Otis. Just like you. He used me. He used my social standing. He manipulated me into thinking he was an honest businessman. She reached out as if to touch my arm, but stopped when Marcus took a step forward, blocking her path. I was trapped. She continued, talking faster now, desperate to distance herself from the sinking ship. I was afraid of him. He has a temper. You know that. You saw how he treated you. Imagine living with that. I wanted to leave him so many times, but I was scared. She looked at me with wide, imploring eyes. You are a good man, Otis. Everyone says so. You know what it is like to be taken advantage of. Please tell the police I had nothing to do with this. Tell them I am innocent. We can help each other. I know where he hides his papers. I can be a witness. She was selling him out. Without a second of hesitation, she was offering up his head to save her own skin. I looked at her and I saw the woman who had laughed when I was fired. I saw the woman who had walked past me in the hallway 100 times without ever seeing me. I saw the woman who had spent my daughter's life savings on spa treatments and shoes. I opened my mouth to speak, to tell her exactly what I thought of her victimhood. But Keisha stepped in front of me. She moved with a grace that silenced the room. The emerald silk of her dress rustled softly. She stood toe-to-toe with Tiffany. Keisha was taller. She was stronger. And in that moment, she was terrifying. Tiffany looked at Keisha and took a step back. She saw something in my daughter's eyes that scared her more than the police. She saw memory. You are not a victim, Tiffany, Keisha said, her voice low and clear, carrying to the back of the room. Keisha, honey, Tiffany stammered, trying to smile. You know I always liked you. I always said you were a sweet girl. Stop, Keisha said. It wasn't a shout, but it hit Tiffany like a slap. You are not a victim. You are an accomplice. Tiffany shook her head frantically. No, I didn't know anything about the business. I just signed what he told me to sign. Keisha reached into the small clutch purse she was carrying. She pulled out a folded piece of paper. Do you remember the night Braden fired my father? Keisha asked. Tiffany blinked, confused by the change in subject. I don't recall. It was December, Keisha said. It was raining, freezing rain. My father came home broken. He told us we had to leave the company housing immediately. That night. Keisha took a step closer, forcing Tiffany to retreat. We packed what we could into bags, but we couldn't fit everything. My father asked for one more day, just one day to rent a truck to move our winter clothes. Tiffany went pale. She remembered. You were there, Keisha said. You were standing on the porch under the awning staying dry, my father begged Braden. But Braden laughed. And then he looked at you. He asked you what we should do with the rest of the junk. Keisha's voice trembled slightly, not with sadness, but with the sheer weight of the anger she had carried for 5 years. And you laughed, Keisha said. You laughed and you picked up my coat, my winter coat, and you threw it into a puddle of mud. The room gasped. This was a cruelty that transcended business fraud. This was personal malice. You said we didn't need coats where we were going, Keisha whispered. You said trash doesn't get cold. I didn't, Tiffany whispered, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean it. You meant it, Keisha said. You enjoyed it. You watched us walk away in the rain, shivering, and you went inside and drank hot chocolate by the fire. Keisha held up the paper she had taken from her purse. And as for not knowing about the business, she said, turning to face the police officers who had finally started to move toward the stage. This is a document from the Shell Company in Panama, Keisha announced. The company used to launder the money from the fake construction contracts. The company used to hide the assets stolen from the investors. She handed the paper to the lead detective who had stepped onto the stage. It authorizes the transfer of $2 million of stolen funds, Keisha said, pointing at Tiffany. And it is signed by the chief financial officer of the Shell Corporation. Keisha looked Tiffany dead in the eye. It is signed by Tiffany Sterling. Tiffany screamed. It was a primal sound of denial. He made me do it, she yelled, grabbing at the detective's arm. He told me it was just for tax purposes. I didn't read it. Ignorance of the law is not a defense, ma'am, the detective said, his voice flat. Especially when your signature is on the laundering order. He took a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Tiffany Sterling, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. She tried to run. It was a pathetic attempt. She spun around in her high heels, slipping on the polished floor. 2 officers grabbed her arms. No, she screamed, kicking and thrashing. Get off me! I am rich! You can't touch me! I am Tiffany Sterling! "You are nobody," Keisha said softly, watching them drag her away. They marched her past me. She looked at me, her eyes wild, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. "Otis," she begged. "Help me. Please." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had thrown my daughter's coat in the mud. "I am sorry," I said, my voice calm. "I don't know you." The officers dragged her through the doors, the same doors she had tried to block us from entering. Her screams faded down the hallway, leaving a ringing silence in the ballroom. I turned back to Braden. He was still sitting on the floor. He hadn't moved. He had watched his wife betray him, and he had watched her fall. He looked up at me. He was alone, truly alone. The detective walked over to him. He didn't even need to speak. Braden held out his hands, wrists together. He was ready to go. He wanted to go. Anywhere was better than being under the spotlight of my gaze. The handcuffs clicked. "It is over," Braden whispered. I shook my head slowly. "No, Braden," I said. "Prison is just the beginning. I bought your debt, remember? Every cent you make in that cell, every dime you scrape together for the rest of your life goes to me." I leaned in close. "You are going to work for me now, and I am going to be a much harder boss than you ever were." The officers pulled him up. They led him away past the silent crowd, past the cameras, past the wreckage of his life. I stood on the stage with Keisha and Marcus. The lights were hot, the room was staring. But I didn't feel like a janitor anymore. I felt clean. The war was over. The enemy was gone. I took my daughter's hand. "Let us go home," I said. We walked down the stairs and out of the ballroom, leaving the empty champagne glasses and the broken dreams behind us. We walked out into the night where the air was fresh and the future was finally ours. The handcuffs were cold and heavy on Braden's wrists, but they did not stop his mouth. He was thrashing against the grip of the detective, his face twisted into a mask of pure denial. He could not accept that the game was over. He could not accept that the board was flipped. His mind was racing frantically, searching for a loophole, for an asset, for anything that could keep him afloat. "You gimp!" he screamed at me, spitting the words across the distance between the stage and the floor. "You think you have won. You think this is over. You are just a janitor in a rented suit." The detective tightened his grip, forcing Braden's head down, but Braden fought back, fueled by the adrenaline of the dying. "I still have the South Project," he yelled, his voice cracking with desperate hope. "You forgot about the land in the South District. It is prime real estate. It is worth $10 million raw. I own that deed free and clear. You can't touch it. I will sell it. I will pay the lawyers. I will be out on bail by morning, and I will crush you." He was laughing now, a manic, hysterical sound. "I am still rich, old man. I am still Braden Sterling. I have equity. You can't kill a man with equity." I watched him scream. I watched him cling to this last driftwood in the middle of the ocean. It was almost pitiful. He truly believed he had a way out. He truly believed that after everything I had done, after every wire I had tripped, and every trap I had sprung, I would leave a door open by mistake. I walked to the edge of the stage. I looked down at him. I waited until he stopped screaming. I waited until the room was silent enough to hear a pin drop. "The South Project," I asked, my voice calm and conversational. "You mean the 60 acres near the old port?" "Yes," Braden hissed, eyes wild. "The port land. It is a gold mine. And it is mine." I reached into the inside pocket of my tuxedo jacket. I pulled out a thin, folded document. It wasn't a deed. It was a bank transfer receipt stapled to a purchase agreement for distressed debt. "Braden," I said, shaking my head slowly, "you really should pay more attention to your mail. Or maybe you just stopped opening it when the collection notices started piling up." I unfolded the paper. "You leveraged that land, Braden. You leveraged it 3 months ago to pay for the down payment on your new yacht. The one you told everyone you bought with cash." Braden went still. His eyes locked onto the paper in my hand. "You took out a bridge loan," I continued. "High interest, short term, secured by the deed to the South Project. And because you have been funneling all your liquid cash into the fake construction accounts to hide it from the IRS, you missed a payment." I took a step down the stairs, getting closer to him. "You missed 2 payments, actually. Last week, the bank classified the loan as toxic. They wanted it off their books. They were scared, Braden. They heard rumors about an investigation. They heard rumors about fraud. Banks hate risk. They hate it almost as much as they hate losing money. I held the paper up so he could see the stamp at the bottom. So I called them. I called the risk management officer at First National. I made them an offer. I offered to buy the debt. I offered to buy the note for full value in cash immediately. Braden's face crumbled. He understood. He knew how the game was played. "You bought my debt," he whispered. I nodded. "I own the note, Braden. I am your creditor. And according to the terms of the loan agreement, which I read very carefully, there is an acceleration clause. If the borrower is under criminal investigation, or if the borrower attempts to liquidate assets to flee jurisdiction, the lender has the right to demand full repayment immediately." I leaned in close, my voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a knife. "I am demanding payment, Braden. Right now. $10 million plus interest and penalties. Do you have it?" Braden stared at me. His mouth hung open. He had nothing. His accounts were frozen. His wife was arrested. His reputation was ash. "I didn't think so," I said, straightening up. "Since you cannot pay, I am exercising my right to foreclose. I am seizing the collateral." I pointed a finger at his chest. "I own the land, Braden. I own the South Project. I own the dirt under your feet. I own the shirt on your back because I bet you bought that on credit too." I turned to Marcus, who was standing by the podium, holding a large rectangular object covered in a velvet cloth. It was a prop, a piece of theater I had prepared for this exact moment. "Bring it here, Marcus," I said. Marcus walked over and pulled the cloth away. It was a check. An oversized ceremonial check, the kind used for photo opportunities and lottery winners. It was made out to Braden Sterling. The amount written in bold black letters was $50 million. It was the investment capital from Kingston Holdings. The money Braden had thrown this party to secure. The money he thought would save his life. Braden looked at the check. He looked at the zeros. It was a picture of the life he almost had. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" I asked. "The golden ticket, the bailout?" Braden nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Please," he begged. "Just give it to me. I will sign over the company. I will go away. Just let me have the money." I looked at the check. Then I looked at Braden. "You don't get it, do you?" I said. "This money was never real. Kingston Holdings is a private equity firm, Braden. My private equity firm. It is my money, and I don't invest in garbage." I grabbed the top of the cardboard check. I gripped it with both hands. The sound of the thick cardboard tearing was loud, violent, and final. Rip! I tore it down the middle. I tore through the 50. I tore through the million. I tore through his name. I ripped it again and again, reducing his salvation to confetti. I threw the pieces into the air. They fluttered down around him like snow, landing on his shoulders, landing in his hair, landing on the handcuffs that bound his wrists. Asset forfeiture. I said, my voice cold as the grave. Braden stared at the pieces of cardboard on the floor. He tried to reach for them with his bound hands, a pathetic, instinctive movement to gather the fragments of his dream, but he couldn't. But the detective pulled him back. "You have nothing, Braden," I said. "You have no land. You have no money. You have no wife. You have no legacy." I leaned down one last time so our faces were inches apart. "You are the nothing now. You are the dirt, and there is no one coming to clean you up." Braden let out a sound that wasn't human. It was a wail of total despair, a sound of a soul breaking into pieces. His legs gave out completely. He collapsed onto the floor, weeping openly, sobbing into the carpet he had once walked on with such arrogance. The room watched in silence. They were witnessing an execution, not of a body, but of a man's entire existence. The detective looked at me. He nodded a silent acknowledgement of the justice that had been served. "Get him out of here," I said. "He is making a mess." The officers hoisted Braden up. He was dead weight. He dragged his feet, his expensive shoes scuffing the floor. He didn't look up. He didn't fight. He was broken. They dragged him through the doors, past the stunned crowd, past the cameras that were broadcasting his humiliation to the world. I stood alone in the center of the room, surrounded by the torn pieces of the check. I took a deep breath. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like closure. Keisha walked up to me. She took my hand. Her grip was warm and strong. "Is it done?" she asked quietly. I looked at the empty doorway where Braden had vanished. I thought about the years of struggle. I thought about the cold nights. I thought about the hunger. "It is done," I said. I looked around the ballroom. The party was over. The guests were leaving, whispering, hurrying to distance themselves from the blast zone. I didn't care about them. I didn't care about the elite. I looked at Marcus. Call the team, I said. We have a lot of work to do. We have a company to rebuild. We have a land trust to manage. And we have a legacy to create. A real legacy, Keisha said, smiling. Yes, I said. A real one. I adjusted my cufflinks. I turned my back on the wreckage. Let us go get a burger, I said. I am starving. Keisha laughed, a bright, clear sound that chased away the last shadows of the evening. A burger sounds perfect, Dad, she said. We walked out of the hotel together, the king and his daughter leaving the ruins of the Pretender behind us, stepping out into a city that was finally truly ours. The revenge was complete, the balance was restored, and for the first time in a long time, the future was a blank page waiting to be written. The panic was a living thing inside Braden's chest, a clawed animal trying to scratch its way out of his rib cage. He scrambled away from the torn pieces of the check, his hands slick with sweat sliding on the polished floor. The applause had died. The music had stopped. The only sound in the room was the harsh rasping of his own breath and the murmur of 100 people watching a god fall from the sky. He looked at the police officers advancing from the back of the room. He looked at me standing like a statue of judgment on the stage. And then the flight instinct took over. The lizard brain that screams run when the fire gets too hot. He scrambled to his feet. He didn't run with dignity. He didn't run with grace. He ran like a rat caught in a pantry light. He threw himself toward the side exit, the service door used by the waiters, the door that led to the dark corridors behind the glamour. He burst through the double doors, his shoulders slamming against the wood. He was in the kitchen now. The steam, the noise of pots and pans, the startled faces of the chefs who froze as a man in a ruined tuxedo sprinted past them, knocking over a tray of silverware. Braden didn't stop. He pushed past the sous chef. He slipped on a patch of grease but kept moving, his arms flailing. He needed the exit. He needed the alley. He needed the night. He reached the heavy steel door at the loading dock. He threw his weight against the crash bar. The door swung open and the cold night air hit him like a physical blow. It smelled of wet asphalt and dumpster rot. It smelled of freedom. He took 2 steps into the darkness, his lungs burning, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. He was going to make it. He was going to find a taxi. He was going to the airport. He was going to disappear. Then the lights blinded him. It wasn't the flashing red and blue of the police cruisers, although they were there too, waiting at the end of the alley. It was the high beams of 2 black SUVs parked directly in front of the loading dock, blocking the exit completely. Braden froze. He put a hand up to shield his eyes. The doors of the SUVs opened. 4 men stepped out. They didn't wear uniforms. They wore leather jackets and expressions of absolute boredom. They were big men, heavy men, the kind of men who charged interest in broken bones. These were the creditors. The people Braden had borrowed the $2 million from just 48 hours ago. The people I had anonymously tipped off about the location of their investment. The man in the center stepped forward. He had a scar running through his eyebrow and a toothpick rolling in the corner of his mouth. He looked at Braden. He looked at the ruined suit. He looked at the terror. "Mr. Sterling," the man said, his voice like gravel in a mixer, "we heard you were leaving town." "That is disappointing. We have a payment schedule to discuss." Braden stepped back. He looked behind the men. He saw the police officers waiting calmly at the perimeter. They weren't interfering. They were letting the fear do the work for them. They were the law, but these men were the consequence. Braden was trapped between the cage and the wolves. "Please," Braden whimpered. "I have the money. It is in the trust. I just need time." "You don't have time," the man said, taking a step forward. "And you don't have the money. We know about the freeze. We know about the fraud. You played us, Braden, and nobody plays us." The man reached into his jacket. Braden didn't wait to see what he was pulling out. He spun around. He ran back toward the door he had just exited. He ran back into the kitchen, back into the hotel, back into the nightmare he had created. He burst back into the ballroom. He was hyperventilating now. His hair was plastered to his forehead. His eyes were wide and white-rimmed. He looked at the crowd. He looked at the police closing in from the lobby. There was nowhere left to go. The world had shrunk down to the size of a coffin. He looked up at the stage. He looked at me. And in that moment, his mind snapped. The arrogance finally broke, completely shattering into a million shards of pure regression. He wasn't the CEO anymore. He wasn't the tycoon. He was a child who had broken a vase and needed someone to fix it. He needed a father. He ran toward the stage. He ignored the gasps of the crowd. He ignored the detective shouting for him to halt. He threw himself at the stairs, crawling up them on his hands and knees. He reached the spot where I stood. He reached out and grabbed the leg of my trousers. He clung to me. He buried his face in the fabric of the suit he had once mocked. "Dad," he sobbed. The word tore out of his throat, a sound of utter defeat. "Dad, please. I am sorry." He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the snot and the sweat. "Otis," he begged, switching names, desperate to find the one that would unlock my mercy. "Otis, look at me. It is Braden. I am your boy. Remember, I hired you. I gave you a chance." He was rewriting history even now. He was twisting the knife of memory. I made a mistake. He cried, his hands tightening on my leg. "I got lost, but I can fix it. I will work for you. I will do anything. Just call them off. Tell the police it was a misunderstanding. Tell those men in the alley I am with you." He kissed my shoe. He actually kissed the leather of my shoe. "Please, Dad," he whispered. "Save me. Forgive me. I will be better. I will start over." The room was deathly silent. 500 people held their breath, watching the man who claimed to own the city begging at the feet of the man he had tried to destroy. I looked down at him. I looked at the top of his head. I looked at the shaking shoulders. I felt nothing. I waited for the pity. I waited for the old instinct of the caretaker, the instinct that had made me clean up his messes for years, to kick in. I searched my heart for a drop of compassion. But the well was dry. I remembered the rain. I remembered Keisha coughing in the cold apartment because we couldn't afford the heating bill after he fired me. I remembered the way he laughed when he told me I was obsolete. I remembered the arrogance. I remembered the cruelty. I pulled my leg away from his grasp. I took a step back, creating a distance that felt like an ocean. I looked at him with the cold, dead eyes of a man who has walked through fire and come out the other side made of ash and iron. "I am not your father," I said. My voice was low, but in the silence it sounded like thunder. Braden froze. He looked up, his face crumbling. "I am not your father," I repeated. "I am the man you threw away. I am the man you stepped on to get to the top." I gestured to the room, to the police, to the wreckage of his life. "And this is not your home," I said. "You don't have a home, Braden. You sold your home to pay for your lies." He reached out again, his hand trembling in the air. "Otis, please." "Your home is prison," I said. The words hung in the air, final and absolute. "Your home is a 6x8 cell," I continued. "Your home is a place where nobody cares about your suit or your watch or your fake legacy. Your home is the hole you dug for yourself." I looked at the detective who was standing at the bottom of the stairs. "Officer," I said, my voice calm and authoritative. "Please remove this man. He is trespassing." The detective signaled his men. 2 officers marched up the stairs. They didn't be gentle this time. They grabbed Braden by the arms and hauled him to his feet. Braden went limp. His legs wouldn't work. He hung between them like a puppet with cut strings. "No," he wailed. "No, please. Otis. Dad, help me." They dragged him across the stage. His feet bumped against the wood. He was crying loudly now, ugly sobbing sounds that echoed off the walls. He twisted his head back, trying to look at me, trying to find a shred of mercy in my eyes. But I had turned away. I was looking at Keisha. I was looking at Marcus. I was looking at the future. The officers dragged him down the stairs. They dragged him through the crowd. The guests parted like the Red Sea, recoiling from him as if he were contagious. They looked at him with disgust, with pity, with the morbid curiosity of people watching a car wreck. Braden saw them. He saw the faces of the people he had tried to impress. He saw the judgment. "I am Braden Sterling," he screamed, his voice cracking into a shriek. "I am somebody. I matter." Nobody answered him. They dragged him to the doors. The flashing lights of the police cars outside pulsed through the glass, red and blue, a strobe light for his demise. He grabbed the door frame, his fingers white-knuckle tight, trying to hold on to the last second of his freedom. "Otis," he screamed one last time. The officers yanked him free. He disappeared into the night, into the waiting back of the police van, into the system that would chew him up and swallow him whole. The doors swung shut. The silence returned to the ballroom. But it wasn't a heavy silence anymore. It was a clean silence. The air felt lighter. The smell of desperation was gone. I stood on the stage alone. I adjusted my cuffs. I smoothed the front of my jacket. I walked down the stairs. I walked over to Keisha. She was smiling. It was a small, sad smile, but it was real. "Is he gone?" she asked. "He is gone," I said. Marcus handed me a glass of water. "To the future," Marcus said, raising his own glass. I took a sip. The water was cool and sweet. "To the future," I said. I looked back at the empty stage one last time. The ghost of Braden Sterling was gone. The janitor was gone. Only Otis King remained. I turned my back on the empty podium and walked out of the ballroom, leaving the past behind me, locked in the dark where it belonged. The revenge was not just about pain. It was about erasure. And tonight, I had wiped the slate clean. The autumn leaves swirled around our feet, dancing across the pavement of Oak Street like dry confetti. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and turning seasons. It was the kind of day that made you want to button your coat tight and breathe in deep, the kind of day that promised change. I stood on the sidewalk, my hands in the pockets of a wool coat that fit me perfectly. Beside me stood Keisha. She wasn't wearing the emerald gown from the gala anymore. She was wearing jeans and a thick cable-knit sweater and boots. She looked like a student. She looked like a young woman with a life ahead of her. She looked healthy. The pallor of the hospital, the shadow of the sickness was gone, replaced by a rosy glow in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the cold. We were looking at the house. It stood there stoic and solid, just as I had designed it 20 years ago. The brickwork was still impeccable. The windows were dark, reflecting the gray sky. For months, this building had been a symbol of my failure. It had been the trophy Braden had stolen, the asset he had liquidated to fund his ego. It had been the place where I was evicted, where I was told I was nothing. But today, the for sale sign was gone. The sold sign was gone. The name Vance was gone from the mailbox. There was only silence and the house waiting for its true owners. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a set of keys. They were heavy brass keys, old school and substantial. I felt the weight of them in my palm. It wasn't just the weight of metal, it was the weight of justice. The legal battle had been shorter than anyone expected. When I sent the file to Vance, the tech entrepreneur who had bought the house, he didn't fight me. He didn't try to claim the land. He was a businessman, and he knew a bad deal when he saw one. He turned his army of lawyers on Braden. He sued for rescission of contract based on fraudulent misrepresentation. He demanded his money back. And because Braden's assets were frozen, because the money he had paid to the cartel was gone, because he was sitting in a holding cell unable to make bail, the sale collapsed. It imploded. The contract was voided by a judge who was tired of the Sterling circus. The ownership of the structure reverted. But it didn't revert to Braden. It couldn't. He had no assets left to hold it. The court ordered the property returned to the holder of the primary lien, the owner of the land, the Keisha Trust. I looked at my daughter. She was staring up at the second-floor window, the window of her old bedroom. "It looks different," she said softly. "It is the same house," I said. "But the shadow is gone." She turned to me and smiled. It was a smile that reached her eyes, a smile that held no fear. "Give them to me," she said, holding out her hand. I dropped the keys into her palm. Her fingers closed around them. "It is your house, Keisha," I said. "It always was. The trust was set up for you. I was just the caretaker." She shook her head. "We are the caretakers, Dad. We take care of each other." She walked up the steps. Her boots echoed on the stone. It was a sound of reclamation. She put the key in the lock. It turned with a smooth, satisfying click. The mechanism hadn't forgotten us. She pushed the door open and we stepped inside. The air inside was cool and still. It smelled of lemon polish and emptiness. Braden had sold all the furniture. The living room was a vast open space of polished hardwood floors. The walls were bare. The ghosts of his presence, the tacky art he had hung, the expensive rugs he had bought to impress his guests were all gone. It was a blank canvas. I walked to the center of the room. I looked at the fireplace. It was a massive stone hearth, the heart of the home. I had laid those stones myself, choosing each one for its shape and color. It was cold now, dark with soot from fires long burned out. Keisha walked around the room, touching the walls, trailing her hand along the mantel. She didn't look sad about the empty space. She looked relieved. "We need a couch," she said, her voice echoing slightly. "And a big table. For studying." I looked at her. Studying, I asked. She turned to face me, leaning against the mantel. Her expression was serious, determined. I applied to law school yesterday, she said. I felt a lump form in my throat. Law school. University of Chicago? She continued. They have a program, a clinic, specifically for family law, for victims of domestic abuse and financial coercion. She crossed her arms, not defensively, but with resolve. I watched what you did, Dad. I watched you use the law. I watched you use the contracts and the deeds and the trusts. You used the system to break a monster. You used the paper to cut him. She looked down at her hands. I don't want to be a janitor, she said, and I don't want to be a private equity shark like Marcus. But I don't want to be a victim either. I want to be the person who stands between the Bradens of the world and the people they try to crush. I want to be the weapon. I walked over to her. I put my hands on her shoulders. I looked into her eyes and saw the steel that had been forged in the fire of the last few months. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was evolving. You will be a great lawyer, I said, my voice thick with pride. You will be dangerous. She laughed, a soft sound that warmed the empty room. I had a good teacher, she said. I reached into the inside pocket of my coat. I had brought something with me. A final piece of business. It was a thick envelope. Inside were photographs. Not the surveillance photos, not the evidence. Those were with the police locking Braden away for 20 years. These were different. These were the photos Braden had sent out in his Christmas cards 2 years ago. Photos of him standing in this very room holding a glass of brandy looking like the lord of the manor. Photos of him and Tiffany on the balcony laughing. Photos of him receiving his fake awards. I had found them in a box in the basement of the office building when I was cleaning out his desk after the arrest. I had saved them for this moment. I walked to the fireplace. I knelt down. There was a stack of old wood left in the brass carrier, dry as bone. I built a small pyramid of logs. I took a box of matches from the mantel. I struck a match. The flame flared to life, yellow and bright. I lit the kindling. The fire caught, instantly crackling hungrily. I opened the envelope. Keisha knelt beside me. She watched the flames dance. I handed her the first photo. It was Braden smiling his shark smile. She looked at it. She didn't tear it up. She didn't spit on it. She just looked at it with the indifference of a historian examining a relic from a barbaric age. He looks small, she said. He was always small, I said. He just cast a long shadow because he blocked the light. She tossed the photo into the fire. The edges curled. The glossy paper bubbled. Braden's face distorted, melted, and then turned to black ash. I handed her another. Tiffany and Braden posing with their new car. Fake Keisha said, tossing it in. The fire grew warmer. The orange glow illuminated the empty room, chasing the shadows back into the corners. It wasn't a violent fire. It wasn't the fire of the smoke trap, I had said. It wasn't the fire of destruction. It was a hearth fire. It was the fire of home. We fed the photos to the flames one by one. We watched the memories of the occupation burn. We watched the pretenders vanish into smoke that rose up the chimney and out into the autumn air to be scattered by the wind. When the last photo was gone, when the only thing left in the fireplace was the clean burning wood and the bed of glowing coals, we sat there on the floor. The heat washed over us. It soaked into my bones, easing the ache in my knees, the tension in my shoulders. I looked at Keisha. The firelight danced in her eyes. She looked peaceful. "Are you hungry?" I asked. She smiled. "Always," she said. I stood up and offered her my hand. She took it and I pulled her up. "Let us go," I said. "We have to buy furniture. We have to buy law books. And I think I owe you dinner." We walked to the door. I paused and looked back at the room one last time. The fire was crackling steadily, a heartbeat for the house. The emptiness wasn't lonely anymore. It was potential. It was space waiting to be filled with new memories. We walked out onto the porch. I pulled the door shut and locked it. I handed the keys back to Keisha. She put them in her pocket. We walked down the steps to the sidewalk. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the street. The neighborhood was quiet. The war was over. I put my arm around my daughter's shoulders. She leaned her head against me. We walked down Oak Street, two survivors who had reclaimed their world. We didn't look back at the house. We didn't need to. It wasn't going anywhere. It was ours. And Braden Sterling was just a story we would tell the fire. A cautionary tale about what happens when you underestimate the man who holds the broom. The end. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. It sat on the polished mahogany surface of my new desk like a stain. The envelope was not the heavy cream linen stock that I was used to receiving from investors or legal firms. It was cheap, thin paper, the kind that felt rough against the fingertips. It was stamped with red ink in the corner. Department of Corrections, inmate correspondence. I knew who it was from before I even saw the return address. The handwriting was familiar but changed. It used to be looping and arrogant, the script of a woman who signed checks with a flourish. Now it was jagged, scrawled. It was the handwriting of someone whose hands were shaking. I picked up the silver letter opener. It was a gift from Marcus, a symbol of our new beginning. I slid the blade under the flap and sliced it open. There was no ceremony, there was no hesitation, just the cold mechanical action of processing trash. I unfolded the letter. The paper smelled faintly of industrial disinfectant and despair. It was the scent of the cage. "Dear Otis," it began. I stopped reading for a moment. She called me Otis, not Mr. King, not Sir. She was trying to create intimacy where there was only hatred. She was trying to remind me that we had known each other in a different life, even if in that life she had treated me like furniture. I continued reading. "I hope you are happy. I hope you are enjoying your big office and your expensive suits. I am writing this from a cell that is smaller than my walk-in closet used to be. The mattress is thin. The blankets scratch my skin. The food is inedible sludge. I have lost 10 pounds, Otis. My hair is falling out from the stress. I am suffering." I leaned back in my chair. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling window at the city skyline. I remembered the days when I cleaned windows like these hanging from a harness in the freezing wind. I remembered the hunger. 10 pounds, she said. Keisha had lost 20 when we were living on the street. The letter continued a litany of complaints. The other inmates were cruel. The guards were rude. There was no privacy. It was a laundry list of indignities that she felt were beneath her station. She still believed she was Tiffany Sterling. She still believed she was royalty in exile waiting for the restoration. And then came the ask. It always comes. "Braden is useless," she wrote. "He is in maximum security. He cannot help me. But you can, Otis. You have the money. You have the power. My lawyer says the judge might grant bail if I can show a substantial surety. $50,000. That is nothing to you now. It is pocket change." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound that echoed in the quiet office. $50,000. It was indeed nothing to me now. I made that in interest while I slept. But it was everything to her. "If you post my bail," she promised, "I will go away. I will leave the state. I will never bother you or Keisha again. I just want to be free, Otis. I am not built for this. I am a delicate person, please. For old time's sake. For the sake of forgiveness. You are a Christian man, aren't you? Show me some mercy, mercy." I put the letter down. I smoothed it out on the desk. She wanted mercy. She wanted me to remember the old times. I closed my eyes and I remembered. I didn't remember the parties or the galas. I remembered a Tuesday in November 3 years ago. I remembered the day after Braden had fired me. We had been evicted from the company housing. We had nowhere to go. The shelters were full. I remembered finding a spot behind a supermarket loading dock. It was out of the wind, but the ground was wet. I remembered finding a refrigerator box, a large cardboard box with the words Frigidaire printed on the side. I remembered dragging that box into the corner. I remembered lining it with newspapers. I remembered telling Keisha that it was a fort, that it was an adventure. She was 19 years old, sick with pneumonia, and she tried to smile for me. She tried to pretend she wasn't freezing to death. We lived in that box for 3 days. 3 days of shivering. 3 days of listening to the rats scurry nearby. 3 days of watching the shoppers walk into the warm store while we huddled in the garbage. I remembered seeing Tiffany's car pull up to that same supermarket. I remembered seeing her get out wearing a fur coat that cost more than my life. I remembered her laughing on her phone, complaining that the store was out of her favorite brand of sparkling water. She walked right past the alley. She didn't see us. She didn't smell us. We were invisible. I opened my eyes. The memory was sharp as a razor. It cut through any lingering softness I might have had. She wanted me to pay for her freedom. She wanted me to use the money I had earned through blood and patience to unlock her cage. I opened the drawer of my desk. I didn't reach for my checkbook. I reached for a stack of postcards I kept there. They were blank on one side. I took a pen, a heavy black marker. I didn't write a letter. I didn't owe her words. I owed her a lesson. I didn't have a picture of the box we lived in. That box had disintegrated in the rain years ago. But I had the internet. I pulled up an image on my computer. It was a stock photo. Stark, brutal. A wet, sagging cardboard box sitting in a dirty alleyway, puddles of oil and water reflecting the gray sky. It looked exactly like our home. I printed the image on high-quality photo paper. I glued it to the front of the postcard. I looked at it. It was a perfect representation of rock bottom. I turned the card over. I thought about what to write. I could have told her about Keisha's fever. I could have told her about the shame of begging for change to buy soup. I could have told her about the anger that kept me warm when the blankets failed. But she wouldn't understand. She lacked the capacity for empathy. She would only read it as a negotiation. So I kept it simple. I kept it financial. I spoke the only language she truly understood. I uncapped the marker. The smell of the permanent ink was sharp. Try living in this. I wrote my letters bold and blocky. I paused. I looked at the letter where she complained about the food in the bed. It is free, I wrote. I signed it simply. The janitor. I didn't sign it, Otis King. I didn't sign it with my title. I signed it with the identity she had despised, the identity she had mocked. I wanted her to know exactly who was keeping her in that cell. I put the postcard in an envelope. I didn't seal it immediately. I looked at it one last time. It was cruel. Yes, it was petty. Perhaps. But it was just. She had thrown my daughter's coat in the mud. She had laughed at our poverty. She had been an accomplice to fraud and theft. She had lived like a queen on stolen money while we rotted. She didn't deserve a bail bond. She deserved the box. I pressed the intercom button on my phone. "Sarah," I said to my assistant. "Yes, Mr. King." Her voice came back crisp and professional. "I have a piece of outgoing mail. It needs to go to the state correctional facility." "Yes, sir. Priority mail." "No," I said. "Send it regular post, the slowest way possible. Let her wait for it." I sealed the envelope. I ran my thumb over the crease, pressing it flat. I imagined her receiving it. I imagined her sitting on her thin mattress, waiting for the mail call, hoping for a check, hoping for a lawyer's letter. I imagined her tearing open the envelope, her hands shaking. I imagined her seeing the picture of the box. I imagined the realization sinking in, the realization that there was no white knight coming, that the bridge was burned, that the man she had appealed to was the man she had stepped on. I imagined her reading the words, "Try living in this. It is free." It would break her. It would extinguish that last flicker of entitlement. It would force her to finally truly inhabit her reality. She was poor now. She was powerless. She was an inmate. And I was the man who left her there. I handed the envelope to Sarah when she walked in. She took it without glancing at the address. "Is that all, sir?" she asked. "That is all, Sarah," I said. She walked out, closing the heavy oak door behind her. I sat alone in the silence. It wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. The debt was paid. The accounts were balanced. Tiffany would stay in prison. Braden would rot in his cell. And Keisha and I would live in the light. I turned back to my computer. I had a meeting with the architects in an hour. We were designing a new community center, a place with warm beds and hot food, a place where no one would ever have to sleep in a box again. I smiled. The revenge was over. The work was just beginning. And for the first time in my life, I was completely, entirely free. The snow fell outside the window, a curtain of white velvet that silenced the world. It was the kind of snow that used to terrify me, the kind of snow that meant wet socks and shivering nights in places where the wind cut through the walls. But tonight, it was just scenery. It was a painting framed by the double-paned glass of the dining room window in the house on Oak Street. The fire in the hearth cracked and popped, spitting orange sparks against the black iron screen. The smell of the room was rich and grounding. Roast beef, rosemary, the deep earthy scent of a pine tree standing in the corner, adorned not with designer ornaments but with simple lights and the few handmade decorations Keisha had managed to save from our old life. I sat at the head of the table. It was the same table I had bought to replace the one Braden sold. It was solid oak, heavy and permanent. There were no guests, there were no investors, there was no Marcus checking his watch, no board members trying to curry favor. There was no Tiffany looking down her nose at the cutlery. There was just me. And there was Keisha. She sat to my right. She was wearing a red sweater that looked too big for her, the sleeves pulled down over her hands. She was laughing. It wasn't the polite, guarded laugh she had learned to use as a shield during the years of our struggle. It was a belly laugh. a deep resonant sound that filled the empty spaces of the house and made the crystal glasses hum. We were talking about nothing. We were talking about her law professor who wore mismatched socks. We were talking about the dog we were thinking of adopting. We were talking about the way the snow looked like sugar. We were not talking about Braden. We were not talking about Tiffany. We were not talking about the box behind the supermarket or the shell companies or the revenge. That book was closed. It was on the shelf gathering dust. I took a sip of wine. It was a vintage bottle one that cost more than my first car. But I didn't drink it for the status. I drank it because it tasted good. I drank it because I could. I looked at Keisha as she buttered a roll. The firelight caught the curve of her cheek. She looked so young. For so long she had looked old. Even at 19 when she was sick, she had the eyes of an old woman who had seen too much winter. Now the youth had returned. The resilience of the human spirit was a miracle I would never stop marveling at. She caught me staring. She stopped buttering the roll. "What is it, Dad?" she asked, smiling. "Do I have gravy on my face?" I shook my head. "No," I said softly. "I was just thinking." "About what?" "About assets," I said. She rolled her eyes playfully. "Always business," she said. "Mr. Chairman, you are off the clock, Otis." "It is Christmas," I smiled. She called me Otis when she wanted to tease me, when she wanted to remind me that the suit didn't make the man. "I am not talking about the company," I said. I looked down at my plate. I thought about Kingston Holdings. It was a beast now, a leviathan of the financial world. Since the fall of Braden Sterling, since the exposure of his fraud, our reputation had skyrocketed. We were the firm that cleaned up the mess. We were the firm with integrity. My net worth was a number that looked like a telephone number. I could buy this street. I could buy this town. But that wasn't the asset. I looked back at her. I was thinking about how for a long time I thought money was the only thing that mattered, I said. I thought that if I just had enough money, I could fix everything. I could fix your health. I could fix our dignity. I could fix the way people looked at us. Keisha stopped eating. She listened. She knew when I was speaking from the heart. And the money helped, I admitted. It bought the medicine. It bought the lawyers. It bought the shovel we used to bury the past. I reached across the table and took her hand. Her skin was warm. But sitting here tonight, I realized something. If the market crashed tomorrow, if Kingston Holdings burned to the ground, if they took the suits and the cars and the house, as long as I am sitting at a table with you and you are laughing like that, I am the richest man on earth. Keisha squeezed my hand. Her eyes shimmered. "You are getting sentimental, old man," she whispered. "I am getting old," I corrected her. It was true. The war had taken a toll. I felt it in the mornings when the rain came and my joints ached. I felt it in the evenings when the adrenaline faded and the fatigue set in. The gray in my beard was not distinguished anymore, it was just gray. The lines around my eyes were deep canyons carved by years of squinting into the wind. I was tired. The rage that had fueled me, the nuclear reactor of hate that had powered the destruction of Braden. Sterling had cooled. It was a quiet ember now. But as I looked at my daughter, I felt something else underneath the fatigue. I felt the muscle. I wasn't the young wolf anymore, hungry and reckless. I wasn't the stray dog kicked in the ribs. I was the old lion. I had scars. My fur was matted in places. My teeth were yellowed. I moved slower. I slept more. I preferred the sun to the hunt. But the power was still there. It was heavy and dormant, sleeping in the chest, waiting. I watched Keisha let go of my hand and pick up her wine glass. She looked happy. She looked safe. She believed she was safe because the bad men were in prison. She believed the world was fair again because we had balanced the scales. She was right to feel that way. She had earned that peace. But I knew better. I knew that the world was full of Bradens. I knew that for every Tiffany there were 10 more waiting in line, hungry for status and indifferent to cruelty. I knew that there were always wolves circling the fire, waiting for the light to dim. And that was why I was still here. I wasn't building an empire for the sake of the empire. I was building a fortress. I was building walls of money and influence and law, not to keep people out, but to keep her safe. I took another sip of wine. I let the warmth spread through my chest. "This is the best Christmas dinner I have ever had," Keisha said, breaking the silence. "It is just roast beef," I said. "It is not the food, Dad," she said. "It is the quiet. Do you hear it? No sirens. No yelling, no fear. I listened. She was right. The house was silent save for the fire and the wind outside. It was a heavy, protective silence. To the quiet, I said, raising my glass. To the quiet, she answered, clinking her glass against mine. We finished the meal. We cleared the table together, washing the dishes by hand, even though we had a machine. There was a rhythm to it, a domestic ritual that felt holy. I washed, she dried. It was the same way we had done it in the tiny apartment before the eviction. The same way we had done it when we had nothing. We went back into the living room. Keisha sat on the rug by the fire, opening a book. It was a thick textbook on constitutional law. She was already studying for next semester. She was relentless. She was my daughter. I sat in the armchair, the leather creaking as I settled in. I watched her read. I watched her brow furrow as she concentrated. I closed my eyes for a moment. I let myself drift. I saw the face of Braden Sterling as he was dragged away. I saw the postcard in Tiffany's cell. I saw the ruins of their lives. I felt no guilt. I felt no remorse. I had done what a father does. I had removed the threat. I opened my eyes. The fire was dying down. The shadows were getting longer. I stood up. I walked over to the woodpile and picked up a heavy log. I placed it on the grate. The sparks flew up, swirling into the chimney. Keisha looked up from her book. "You okay, Dad?" she asked. "I am fine," I said. "Just keeping the fire going." She smiled and went back to her reading. I stood by the hearth, one hand resting on the mantel. I looked at the reflection in the mirror above the fireplace. I saw an old man. I saw the wrinkles. I saw the weariness. But I also saw the eyes. They were clear. They were sharp. They were watching. I might be old. I might be tired. I might be a janitor in a tuxedo. But let anyone try to touch her again. Let anyone try to throw her coat in the mud. Let anyone try to steal her peace. They would find out that the old lion still has claws. They would find out that the fire never truly goes out. I am Otis King. I am the father. And I am always watching. "Merry Christmas," I whispered to the reflection. "Merry Christmas, Dad," Keisha said without looking up. I sat back down. I watched the fire. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself close my eyes and truly sleep, knowing that the perimeter was secure and the monsters were gone. I stand at the window of my office on the 42nd floor. The city is spread out below me, a grid of light and shadow breathing in the cold night air. From up here, the people look like ants scuttling back and forth on their predetermined paths. It is the same view Braden used to have. It is the same view he thought made him a god. But when I look down, I do not see subjects. I see the streets I used to sweep. I see the alleys where I slept. I see the invisible network of labor and struggle that holds the whole world up. Braden never looked down. That was his fatal flaw. He spent his whole life looking up, looking at the next prize, the next acquisition, the next rung on the ladder. He never looked at the foundation. He never checked the ground he was standing on. He assumed the floor would always be there because he believed he deserved it. He believed gravity did not apply to men in $3,000 suits. He was wrong. I turn away from the window and walk back to my desk. It is clean, organized. There are no piles of unpaid bills. There are no frantic notes from lawyers. There is just a single folder containing the final report on the dissolution of Sterling Enterprises. The company has been broken up, sold for parts, the assets liquidated to pay back the victims of his fraud. The name Sterling has been erased from the skyline. It is as if he never existed. I sit down in the leather chair. It is comfortable, but it does not define me. If this chair vanished tomorrow, if this building crumbled to dust, I would still be Otis King. I would still be the father. I would still be the man who walked through the fire. Braden's mistake was not just greed. Greed is common. Greed is predictable. His mistake was arrogance. It was the absolute certainty that he could step on people without consequence. He looked at me, and he saw a uniform. He saw a gray jumpsuit and a mop. He saw a function, not a human being. He thought that because I was quiet, I was stupid. He thought that because I served, I was weak. He did not understand the power of silence. Silence is not surrender. Silence is observation. While he was shouting at his assistants, while he was bragging to his investors, while he was screaming at his wife, I was listening. I was gathering information. I was learning the rhythm of his lies. I was finding the cracks in his armor. He gave me the keys to his destruction every time he opened his mouth. He told me about the shell companies. He told me about the loans. He told me about the fraud. All I had to do was stand there and be invisible. All I had to do was polish his shoes while he bragged about his crimes. I opened the folder. I look at the mugshot stapled to the top of the file. Braden looks different without the lighting and the makeup. He looks gray. He looks tired. The defiance is gone from his eyes, replaced by the hollow stare of a man who knows he will die in a cage. He thought power came from noise. He thought power was about intimidation. He thought that if he yelled loud enough, the world would bend to his will. He bullied his employees. He bullied his wife. He bullied the contractors. He created a kingdom of fear, but fear is brittle. Fear shatters. My power came from patience. It came from the long game. It came from the ability to endure humiliation today for the sake of victory tomorrow. I let him kick me. I let him insult me. I let him think he had won. I fed his ego until it was so bloated it blinded him. And then when he was at his most vulnerable, when he was standing on the stage reaching for the sun, I took away the ground. I closed the folder. I do not need to look at his face anymore. He is the past. I think about Tiffany. I think about the postcard I sent. It was a harsh lesson, but a necessary one. She was a different kind of monster, the kind that enables, the kind that watches cruelty and laughs. She thought her beauty and her social standing protected her. She thought she was above the consequences. She found out that when the money is gone, the charm evaporates and all that is left is the character you built. And her character was empty. The journey was not easy. There were nights when I wanted to give up. There were nights when the rage was so hot I thought it would burn a hole in my chest. There were times when I looked at Keisha sleeping in that hospital bed and I wanted to go to Braden's house with a hammer and end it the old-fashioned way. But violence is the tool of the weak. Violence is messy. Violence makes you a criminal. I wanted more than violence. I wanted justice. I wanted to dismantle him piece by piece using the very laws he thought he could ignore. I wanted to beat him at his own game. And I did. I lean back and close my eyes. I can hear the hum of the city outside. I can hear the quiet rhythm of the office. But mostly, I can hear the memory of Keisha's laugh from dinner last night. That is the real victory. Not the money, not the building. Not the destruction of my enemy. The victory is her safety. The victory is the light in her eyes. The victory is knowing that she will never have to be afraid again. She will never have to shiver in the cold. She will never have to watch her father be humiliated. She will walk through this world with her head held high, not because of who her father is, but because of who she is. She learned the lesson too. She learned that the world is hard, but we are harder. She learned that justice is not something you are given, it is something you take. She is studying law not to become rich, but to become a shield. She is going to be the nightmare of every bully and every tyrant who thinks they can prey on the weak. I stand up and walk back to the window. The reflection in the glass shows an older man, a man with silver in his beard and scars on his soul. But it shows a man who is whole. I remember the day Braden fired me. I remember standing in his office holding my box of personal effects while he laughed. He told me I was obsolete. He told me I was a dinosaur. He told me to go die in the gutter. He pushed me into the dark. But he forgot that some men can see in the dark. He forgot that the dark is where the ambush waits. He forgot that you should never corner a man who has nothing left to lose because that man will burn your whole world down to light his way out. I press my hand against the cool glass. This city is full of stories. It is full of people like Braden and Tiffany, people who take and take and take. But it is also full of people like me, people who sweep the floors, people who serve the coffee, people who drive the cars, the invisible army. We are watching. We are listening. We are remembering. And every now and then, when the arrogance gets too high, when the cruelty becomes too much, one of us steps out of the shadows. One of us decides that enough is enough. One of us decides to balance the scales. Braden Sterling learned the hard way. He learned that the higher you climb, the harder you fall. He learned that the foundation matters more than the facade. He learned that you never mess with a father protecting his child. I turn off the lights in my office. The room plunges into darkness, illuminated only by the glow of the city outside. I pick up my coat. I pick up my keys. I am going home. I am going to sit by the fire. I am going to read a book. I am going to enjoy the peace I fought for. But I will leave the light on in the hallway, just in case. Just a reminder that the lion is resting, but he is never sleeping. The watch continues. And for anyone out there listening, anyone who thinks they can bully the weak, anyone who thinks their money buys them immunity, anyone who treats people like dirt on their shoe, remember Braden Sterling, remember the janitor, and be careful. You never know who is holding the mop. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding all the cards. Braden thought power came from shouting, spending, and bullying those he deemed weak. He mistook my silence for surrender and my simplicity for poverty. He never realized that true strength isn't about how loud you roar, but how hard you bite when it matters. Family isn't just blood, it is loyalty. And betrayal is a debt that always comes due with interest. He sold a house, but in doing so, he bought his own destruction. Never underestimate a father protecting his child. If you enjoyed this story of justice and revenge, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments what you would have done if you were in my shoes. Would you have shown mercy, or would you have done exactly what I did? I read every comment, and I want to hear your voice. Until next time, stay strong, stay sharp, and always watch your back.